So as co-vice chair of the State Board of Education, I'll call this meeting to order, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I'll hand this back to the real chair.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you all for coming today. We have a fair amount on our agenda in the next 2 days. This is our annual board retreat, which we really look forward to, and hopefully we'll accomplish a lot by the end of the day tomorrow. My name is Stephen Morse. I'm from Windham County and chair of the State Board of Education.
My name is Lachlan Francis from Putney.
Sean Marie Oler from Bedington.
Morgan McIver, Plainfield.
Krista Hewling from Jeffersonville.
Good morning. Mark Perrin from Middlebury.
Stacy Weinberger, Burlington.
Bill Mathis, Goshen.
Rebecca Holcomb, Agency of Education.
I would, if you haven't already signed in, there's a sign-up sheet back on the back table there to my left. And I finally, Carol, after all these years, I've remembered to give that reminder on your last meeting. So, the first order of business is there members of the public that wish to be heard. Not seeing any, we will move on to item C, the consent agenda.
So moved. Oh, I'm sorry, so moved with questions.
What did she say?
So moved with
Here's
questions.
questions.
With questions? The motion has been made to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mark Perrin. All those in favor say aye. Whoop, wait a minute.
I'm sorry, I said, I move with a question.
Okay.
And the question is on item C for the independent school. So I guess I'm not sure who the question goes to, but I'm curious why this particular school for the IEPs and the special education doesn't go beyond age 17. It's for students ages 12 to 17.
Is there someone from the agency that perhaps can answer that question?
I can contact the agency and figure out why, and I'm not sure.
Okay, and then on the second page of the write-up, it says 3 on behalf of the commissioner, and is this because this was on behalf of Commissioner Villaseca over a year ago, or is this just, it should have been on behalf of the secretary?
I'm trying to figure, which document are you on?
The same one, back of the first page,
What
number 3.
what is it, Barry, though, that you're talking about?
I'm talking about the independent school approval
Yep.
for Fay Honey Knopp Memorial School.
Page 2, number 3.
Yes.
Reads on behalf of the commissioner.
I seem to have the paper up here.
It's just it's, just wondering if it was that long ago, or if it's just the,
Well, I believe that was during the secretary's reign as well. Wasn't it? Armando's the secretary.
it was a
Oh,
really.
yes, that was under, well, it should probably have said on behalf of the secretary, but that was when Armando was still here. Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
Yes.
and I really appreciate the write-up. It was very detailed. I just, again, I'm not looking necessarily for an answer, but curious at this moment why this particular school would only do through 17.
We will in the motion, we will make that correction in number 3 to secretary. And Sean Marie, if you're comfortable with this,
Oh, I'm fine.
you'll get an answer by the end of the day on it.
We'll get you an answer.
It should
Sure.
be 17 or 18. Any other comments? If not, all those in favor of the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and we've approved the consent agenda. We'll move on to Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union. I would suggest that the way we conduct this part of the meeting is that we hear from the agency, If board members have questions, feel free to ask. And then if there are members of the public from the area that wish to speak, we'll call on you next, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And before us, we have Vaughn, who is responsible for this section of the agency. I've asked Vaughn to refresh our memories and give us a brief history, underline the word brief, history of this process.
Do you want a history, Mr. Chairman, or do you want brief?
I want brief.
On December 18th, 2012, the State Board of Education accepted Secretary Valseca's recommendation that the Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union undertake a boundary study. The Supervisory Union requested that the agency undertake the study on its behalf, and commented that they looked forward to their district's involvement. The agency contracted with Norm Andrews to conduct the financial portion of the study. November 19th, 2013, at the board meeting, the agency presented a report that allocated Bethel and Rochester to Orange Windsor, Granville and Hancock to Washington West Supervisory Union, and Stockbridge and Pittsburgh to Windsor Central Supervisory Union. The agency provided figures on the freed resources and the potential for expanded educational opportunities. It looked as though there might have been a significant synergy among a number of relatively small high schools. The major concern that the board heard at that time appeared to be over the allocation of districts to supervisory unions, rather than the actual need for boundary changes. The state board conducted a straw vote approving the reallocation of boundaries and directed the parties involved to propose allocations they preferred at the December 17th meeting. At the December meeting, the State Board of Education granted a request for more time by directing a report be submitted by June 1st. A letter, dated May 4th, 2014, and signed by 5 area superintendents, including David Bickford and Alice Worth, the two involved in the receiving supervisory unions, recommended assigning Pittsfield to Windsor Central and all 5 of the other districts to Orange Windsor. In that time, the chair has received and passed on to the board a number of comments on the proposal. So after discussion, the Secretary's recommendation is for the State Board of Education to extend the decision date for the regrouping of Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union until the January 20th, 2015 State Board of Education meeting. She further recommends that the Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union and Orange Windsor Supervisory Union should undertake a detailed study, and I emphasize detailed, of the advantages and costs of various allocations of district from the perspective of improved educational opportunity and increased efficiencies. The details required in the study are in the recommendation. I won't take the time to read them to you. The Secretary proposes the report would be due January 15th, 2015 for an expected decision at the January 20th State Board of Education meeting. The Secretary further recommends that today the State Board of Education approve a boundary change requested by the Pittsfield School Board to move from Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union to the Windsor Central Supervisory Union as of July 1st, 2015. Now, in terms of explanation, I'll start with Pittsfield because it's the easier one. Pittsfield had entered into discussions with Windsor Central about the boundary change before the State Board of Education initiated the study in December 2012. Data presented at the agency's November 2013 report provides adequate documentation of the advantages of the boundary change. A June 5th, 2014 letter received from Kristen Sperber on behalf of the Pittsfield District Board formally makes the request and documents the favorable district vote at the March annual meeting. Furthermore, the petition is consistent with the allocation that was recommended by the area superintendents in their letter, and signed by, that letter was signed by Superintendent Worth, who would be receiving Pittsfield. So we see advantages. It would keep money, including federal grant money, with students who have secondary choice. We went through the advantages in November. If there are questions, I can go through them more. But basically, as far as I know, we've had nothing but support for this proposal. And the fact of the matter is that if there had been no study, I have very little doubt that Pittsfield would already be in Windsor Central. So the Secretary recommends that that's ready to go now. I think the recommendation to extend the study of the assignment of the other districts, yet again, requires additional justification. The reasons for the reassignment are, if anything, I think stronger than ever. The Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union is small. Several of its districts are struggling with declining enrollment or other financial issues. Bethel and Rochester have been considered high-spending special education districts since at least fiscal year '05. The definition of high spending is more than 20% above the statewide average for special education costs per ADM. Bethel is always over 60% and substantially above the cutoff, and Rochester's not very far behind. Rochester, even after an uptick in enrollment in 2014, is still on a downward trend in equalized pupils. They have an equalized pupil count of 143.59 for 2015. Of those, 42.83 are euphemistically referred to as phantom students. That's actually 30% of the total. And the way, wish we had a better word, the way phantom students are created is when enrollment declines more rapidly than the 3.5% decline after which you hit hold harmless. Equalized pupil is cut at the 3.5% decline. And if you have that happen for a number of years, the growth in phantom students grows. And even if the uptick continued for a number of years, we would still be seeing a decline in equalized pupils until the uptick and the residual decline at 3.5% a year of equalized pupil intersected. So we will have a decline of equalized pupils going forward for a number of years. That creates additional pressure on tax rates and budgets.
Can you tell us what the difference is in those student counts? Maybe I missed it. You took the phantom students out. What's the actual enrollment?
The actual is a fraction over 100. I'm sorry, I didn't. It's basically 143.59 minus 42.83.
In 15, it looks like, you're talking about just Rochester?
Yes.
Will be 42, basically 43 phantoms. In the
Right.
past year, they had 53.
Right.
Can I ask Stephen?
Yes, as long as I've interrupted, I guess you can too. Go ahead.
No interruptions, please. Questions immediately.
John Marie, yes.
So I guess just to make it a little less muddy, when you talk about phantom students, they're students that are counted in terms of money that has to be paid for those. When you say 43 students are actually being who's paying for those 43 non-existent students?
Remember, we no longer give money per student.
No, I know, so I'm asking how that works. How does it-
Basically, what happens is instead of the actual number of equalized pupils without hold harmless, you divide the actual number plus the phantom students into education spending, and you
So-
get your spending for equalized
so
pupils.
So
Basically,
they,
yeah.
okay, I'm just gonna, so in other words, if you took the real cost per student to the district, it is right now
Should we pass this out? Bob?
divided by,
Please.
This might help. I'm gonna pass this out. This is,
so in other words, if you took, 100 students and divided it into the bill, the gross number, you'd get a number, but you're really not educating 100 students, you're actually educating 43 less than that.
right, for the purposes of
Well-
the purposes of the ed fund, they receive resources from the ed fund as if they had 143 students, but
Their-
they're
their
actually
tax
100
rate-
bodies in the building.
Their tax rate is based on dividing 143 into their spending instead of 100 into their spending. If they used a smaller denominator, then it would be considerably more per
Right.
student, about
Right,
30% more.
So one of the things, and this is really a tangent, Stephen, and I'll let it go as a tangent, is that somebody ought to think about, the agency, the legislation ought to think about the number being used that is comparable district to district is the actual cost per student versus the phantom students versus the other revenue versus things that really make the actual number seem really complex to get to.
If you want to take a minute to look at what just went around, I think that was an effort to sort of help us clarify that. So
Okay.
if you look at this document that just went around, what's at the top are the pupil counts. And if you look at the far right under equalized pupil, it gives you by year. The first column is the equalized number of pupils. The middle column is the hold harmless equalized pupils, because our finance formula insulates schools from rapid declines in enrollment. This district is being treated as if it has 143 students, even though it in actuality has 100 students. And then if you look at the homestead tax rates, 2014, 2015 below it, you can see the education spending. That's what they budgeted for fiscal year 2014. They're budgeting less in fiscal year 2015. You can see the equalized numbers of pupils and the actual numbers of pupils in each year. You can see the equalized spending for each year. In 2014, it was 14,000 for, when you count in the phantoms, it was effectively 21 or almost 22,000 per pupil if you pull out the number of phantoms. And then in the next year, you can see the numbers are a little bit lower in the coming year. And then you can see another thing that's worth looking at is the equalized homestead tax rate. If you skip down, it's 1.44. When you include the hold harmless phantoms, it would jump, if we took those phantoms out in the current year, it would jump to 2.79 if they weren't, that's what their tax rate would be if they didn't have phantom students. So that's a better way perhaps to answer some of your questions for this district.
And is this a receiving town?
In terms of receiving resources?
No, in terms of are they a sending town or a receiving town in terms of the ed fund?
They're receiving.
Virtually, there are a very, very small number of sending towns since Act 68, because because of the way it changed all property except residential 2-acre property. So it would be a receiving town, but just about everybody is to some extent a receiving town. There are a few exceptions.
I think it is worth noticing, though, I mean, the other piece that addresses that, if you look at the amount over excess, that's what districts have to pay in if they exceed the excess spending threshold. If Rochester did not have phantom pupils, it would, in fiscal year 2014, it would have been exceeding that excess spending threshold and would have had to make pretty steep contributions over and beyond what it currently is doing. And the same would be true in fiscal year 2015, even with a smaller budget.
So it's fair to say that if the if the legislation that protected the drop in enrollment did not exist, the reality would be that the tax rates and the cost per students would be a lot higher.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So in fiscal year 2014, their equalized homestead tax rate would have been 2.7, well, 2.8.
And just, do you know when that legislation, the 3.5%, went into existence?
I think it was in with,
1997.
yeah, the inception.
Right, at the very beginning of that. My sense is the legislature wanted to protect against instability, and I don't think that they envisioned the aggregation year after year after year. There have been a number of proposals in the legislature to occasionally eliminate it, but more often phase it out. So, hey, 3.5%, you have a warning. Maybe it goes up next year, and then after a couple it goes completely away. But they have not passed.
I think the intent was that we know that small schools, because they're small, very small changes in numbers can be a fairly large proportion of their total number, and
Right.
that would leave them vulnerable to fiscal fluctuation. We'll just put it that way. So this was a way to try to insulate them from
Stability.
fluctuations in
Well, I
population.
guess I have one last question, then Stephen, you can cover.
Yes.
There's
Yes,
phantom
it does.
students.
Yes, it does.
And is that their small schools grant in here, if you took that out, what the cost per pupil would in fact be as well?
It took us about 2 weeks, and we aren't 100% sure what their total cost per pupil. And part of the challenge is that it's different at the secondary and high school level. And you could also look, if you look, you can see how they've figured it in some of the next pages of documentation. It's difficult to figure out which of the costs that go to the high school versus the elementary school because of the way they do their accounting. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's
But
absolutely right.
we've gotten estimates. I mean, what we see here is, on average, for K through 12, in fiscal year 2015, their actual equalized pupil cost, if you backed out the phantoms, would be close to $20,000 per kid. It would be higher, obviously, at the secondary level. So it could be, we've guesstimated between $25,000 and $27,000 per kid at the high school level, and lower at the elementary level.
Assigning costs,
That includes them receiving a small schools grant.
the small schools grant
Yes.
is deducted so that the numerator is, in which the 143 is divided into, is lower. So yes, it lowers their taxes.
Okay, now that we've answered all of Sean Marie's questions, let's proceed with your presentation.
Good
To
question.
be, in the spirit of being concise, I'll just briefly mention that Bethel has been going through some budget difficulties. They have a deficit that I think it's fair to say took them by surprise, and I believe at the moment they don't yet have a budget. So the reasons that Secretary Villaseca recommended this action some time ago are still here, and the question is, why is the Secretary recommending a delay? The May 10th letter from the superintendents to Chairman Morse was a proposed allocation of the districts, and the primary criterion used was the location chosen by the largest number of tuition students, and that makes a great deal of sense. It didn't explore the financial implications of the allocation or the educational opportunities, although I think it's fair to say, looking at the agency's report, the superintendent's examining it probably had a good idea of that. Norm Andrews, who prepared the original financials, very graciously recalculated the financial figures in the November report pro bono for the agency to be consistent with the proposed allocation in the May 10th letter. If you, instead of accepting the recommendation, wanted to discuss going forward today, he's always backing me up. He would be able to talk with you about it. the overall resources that are freed up are basically the same. The distribution is a bit different. But the fact that freed resources to supervisory unions exist leave numerous unknowns for districts in the supervisory union. If you recall, we talked last time about the importance of assessments and the fact that all of the districts that were involved in our report, each of them had assessments that were different than the others. Windsor Northwest, for its central office assessment, uses ADM. Orange Windsor uses enrollment. For special education, Windsor Northwest uses ADM and child count, and Orange Windsor uses equalized pupils. Without, it isn't entirely clear when you put that big a group over that you would want the same assessment formula. And because of that, even if we can say we expect the SU to save some resources, I mean, freed resources means in part, you know, I keep emphasizing it doesn't mean lower taxes, it may mean more money for education. Some of these districts are struggling, and if they get freed resources, it may well be that the most responsible thing is to use them in that manner. But the problem that the community's faced is right now there is a great deal of uncertainty, less from the SU's perspective than from the individual district's perspective. And we and the chairman also received communications to that effect.
So just to clarify, there are different assessment processes in use across the state and across districts, and changing the assessment process would have profound implications financially for different districts.
Yes.
And since there is inconsistency, we're not sure that all districts and all towns in those supervisory unions understand the financial implications.
And even in our November 2013 report, the agency's report, we were requesting a waiver for Bethel because of the size of its special education costs, where it would be responsible for its own costs rather than effectively being subsidized by the larger supervisory union.
You might need some way to separate them and grandfather them in until the new supervisory union has a chance to bring those costs in line with what we would expect to be more
And it
reasonable.
seems reasonable for people in districts to have some sense of how the matter will be dealt with in the period of transition, whether I think it would certainly include Bethel. Maybe each of the new districts needs to pay for its own expenses for a period of time. Maybe even, assuming all five stay together in the new report, maybe there's a slightly, if the board were to choose a way to grant a waiver, separate formula for the new districts for a period. Ms. Oler, did you have a?
Only if Stephen says it's okay.
I'm eager to, if you
Go
can save
ahead.
the question
I will.
to get Vaughn through his report, and then, so we can move on.
And then finally, our original proposal was clearly moving the boundaries for districts, 2 districts per 3 SU. When you take 5/6 of Windsor Northwest and move it to Orange Windsor, from our perspective, it's starting to look a lot more like a supervisory union merger than a reallocation of districts to SUs. And we are familiar with the experience of Two Rivers, and they were very willing, they worked really hard, and it was a tremendous amount of work and took quite a bit of time. So we thought in that new context, the additional time would be well spent. And I think it's fair to say that You received letters from Mr. Groppe, the chair of Windsor Northwest's Supervisory Union Board, and from Meg Powell, the new superintendent. I think that the secretary's recommendation is entirely consistent with their hopes and the opportunity to do the kind of job they want to do. Mr. Groppe had originally asked for a year. We felt that it could be done in less time than that, but other than that, I think it's consistent. And I think perhaps equally as significant, given the nature of the change now, that it looks a great deal like a supervisory union merger, we don't think that July 1st, 2015 would be a feasible date for all the things that need to be done, working out new supervisory union assessment formulas, or at least debating whether or not they're needed, so on and so forth. So we think that this extension actually doesn't extend the implementation date. We think it'll still be, should the board choose, July 1st, 2016. And the work that we're detailing for the study is work that they would need to do if you were to act today. So that's the recommendation for the postponement.
And one further thought, it's my understanding is that one of the reasons that, and I don't think you've made reference to this, I may have missed it, but one of the reasons the agency is recommending that we delay this decision until January of 2015 is that there are 2 new superintendents moving into the area.
You're absolutely right. It's in my notes, and I skipped it. Mr. Chairman, that's quite important. Thank you. The 2 new superintendents coming into districts, getting to know their own districts, and then attempting to engage in the transition activities was an additional significant factor in our thinking. I can even show you the spot where it is afterwards. My apologies.
I have a copy of your notes. Sean Marie.
You know, it has to do with the apportionment of expenses. And I've certainly brought this up before, but according to statute, it really, the apportionment of expenses in Title 16, Chapter 301 talks about that each school district shall pay a portion of share of salary expenses of superintendent and expenses of supervisory union based on the number of enrolled students in each school district. And then they can, in fact, vote if the board so chooses in some other statute to do it a different way. But I'm not convinced, after 20 years on the school board, that school boards actually know that they might have voted to do it a different way at some point in time. And there might need to be some clarity from the agency and a transition going forward so that you're not comparing ADMs to equalized pupils to all sorts of different calculations in each different school district.
Well, by statute for allowable tuition, we need to use an FTE count, which right off the bat creates a significant difference between the district itself and then the allowable tuition figure. But your point is accurate in terms of their ability to vote additional amounts or to reach, now you only vote additional amounts for independent schools. You pay the actual allowable tuition for public schools unless the receiving district and the sending district have come to an agreement. And by statute, the receiving district has to offer that agreement to all sending districts. The sending districts can say no, and they go back to the state formula. But there are a modest number of districts that have worked out such arrangements, and typically the reason is stability. There's a lot of variation in allowable tuition. It's hard to get right particularly in districts where tuition students are a high portion of enrollment, because tuition students vary more than residents. And so you have business managers and boards acting in very good faith, and sometimes they're, in spite of that, wrong. And when that happens, sending districts get a double whammy, because they have to pay the adjustment when things are tallied up in the allowable tuition report. Plus, the next year, the business manager and the board take it into account and they raise the tuition. So you get a raise, and then you have to pay for the retroactive raise in the same year. And that's difficult for tuition districts. You're absolutely right.
So in the discretion of the chair, unless I hear objection, we will consider this report in two sections. We will consider item 1, where the agency is recommending that we extend the study for Windsor Northwest Supervisory Reunion until January 20th, 2015. And then as a second item, we will consider the Pittsfield School Board proposal.
So I'd like to move on the first item with an amendment.
All right.
I'd like to suggest to this board that we change the date to December 1st, 2014. So I think January 1st, after the month of December, leads to often delays. And then I'd like to add that a report be due to the board October 1st.
All right. We will consider these amendments, but let's hear from other people that wish to speak today,
Okay.
and then you can make your amendments. But that's great that you mentioned them now, so when they're testifying, they're aware that this will be on the table later.
Okay.
Vaughn, thank you. I'm sure we'll call you back here. Are there other members of the public that wish to address the Windsor Northwest issue? Again, we will consider the Pittsfield issue as a second item. Yes, sir. Please, if you wish to address it, please come up to the table. And kindly introduce yourself and,
All right, my name is Frank Russell. I'm on the Rochester School Board. Also, Mrs. Labacia, our chair, is present too, but I think she's shy of speaking for some reason, right? We have the Rochester School Board letter that the board received already, and we're in agreement with the bullet pointed recommendations, positions that are at the end of the letter. Right? That has not changed. However, with the board's forbearance, I'd like to offer additional testimony that updates our letter and also provides a perspective that I think is germane to what I was just hearing, actually, right? So with your permission,
You may
Chairman
move
Morris.
ahead.
Right, thank you. All right, I apologize, I'm nervous, right? All right, Chairman Morris, members of the State Board of Education, Secretary Holcomb, Mr. Altimus. In the interest of time, I will not be reading the material in the bracketed sections, right, that I've highlighted. I'm offering testimony before the State Board of Education today on behalf of the Rochester School Board. I speak here not only requesting delay from the State Board in taking action on the restructuring of Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union, but also looking toward action from the Windsor Northwest Board and from a new Windsor Northwest administration in the upcoming months and year. The members of the School Board, of Rochester School Board, are requesting delay first on the same grounds and for the same reason that the State Board released 4 other supervisory unions and 1 supervisory district from the required boundary change studies at its February 18th meeting. And I've quoted from that meeting, all right? Right, then I'll go down to the last 2 sentences. During this past legislative session, the legislature did make adjustments to the mechanisms funding our local schools. We think it highly likely that in the upcoming sessions, educational government legislation will again be proposed in the House. We read in the June 12th Herald of Randolph that Chairman Morris was, quote, disappointed that after 6 months, they, the superintendent's group, didn't come up with a plan that was locally supported. Given the level of uncertainty and the amount of change within Windsor Northwest and Orange Windsor Supervisor Union since September, and I've indicated some of the sources, we are not surprised that the superintendent's group proposal did not have local support. However, we were also heartened by the tone of Chairman Morse's closing comment in the Herald article. We'll work something out. Encouraged by this promise, we are also requesting delay from the State Board today because there is such a clear need for this delay. We second and strongly support our incoming Windsor Northwest Superintendent Meg Powden's request in her May 23 letter to the board for time and flexibility. And then I've quoted from her letter. In a process such as she describes, importantly, stakeholders will have a voice and school boards will retain local control. But our school board comes before the State Board today with a strong orientation toward action also. As a concrete indication of this, Rochester School Board's Windsor Northwest delegates will make a motion at the next supervisory union meeting in July to direct Meg Powden to apply for a planning grant from the Agency of Education. In his June 2 letter to the board, Windsor Northwest Board Carl Groppe requested a year-long extension. In our view, a reasonable time frame for production of a detailed and locally supported plan for the restructuring of Windsor Northwest. But to refine the request contained in Carl Groppe's letter, the members of Rochester School Board think it would be not unreasonable either for the State Board to direct that Meg Powden submit a written report on her progress in developing such a plan in time for board review, say, at their October meeting, and to request that she propose at this meeting dipsticking dates, sorry, that's educational jargon, for reports to the board on ongoing progress in the months leading up to June 2015. In sum, we're asking for this extension first, so that a compelled boundary change today may not be found later to be inconsistent with statute, and thus make necessary another restructuring. And second, because there is so clearly a need for the time and flexibility this extension would grant. With a one-year extension granted finally, Windsor Northwest may perhaps appear again in a front-page Herald of Randolph article a year from now, not as a poster child for forced consolidation, but rather as a model for a successful process of locally supported SU consolidation. With apologies, to depart from my written text for a moment, I can say more about what my testimony adds to the Rochester June 3 letter the board has in front of it, but I was particularly interested in speaking today because Rochester School Board's refinement of Carl Groppe's recommendation for delay provides a needed middle ground between the poles of forced consolidation and deferred action, and a plan allowing stakeholders to have a voice and school boards to retain local control, while yet providing for oversight over progress toward the desired goal of voluntary restructuring of Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union. Sorry, I had this epiphany weeding the garden yesterday. On behalf of the Rochester School Board, I wish to thank the members of the State Board for allowing me the time to testify today and for their thoughtful consideration of my testimony.
So, Mr. Russell, as I hear your testimony, and this may be one of the first times I've heard something from this area, that you're chair of the school board?
No, Mrs. LaBecher is the chair.
You're a member of the school board. But what I hear you saying is that you do have the intention to study this consolidation and come back to us, and maybe where we do disagree is just on the time frame of that.
Yes, I think in our letter we indicate that we're not at all opposed to considering consolidation with other supervisory unions. I mean, that's just not the issue.
I would find that encouraging, given the history of this situation.
Well, I'm sorry, I haven't been on the board very long, so here I am.
Please stay on the board. Mark?
Yes, maybe you can let us know how this whole process, which is 2 years in the making, maybe 3 years in terms of studies, is affecting student outcomes or children, and indirectly or directly because of hiring difficulties within the SU.
I think there is a causal effect, so much uncertainty. And the uncertainty is not just what the board is doing, but also with H-883. I've indicated, we indicated that there was a lot of hiring going on with superintendents, but it's also principals. again, Bethel, Stockbridge, and also South Royalton. And also there's staff turnover. And it's something where the kids are coming up saying, you know, is our school being closed? And it's just like, it's just wearing on, on everyone. And we try to, you know, assure them that the state board, you know,
So does the timing of the reports, because if I understand correctly, we're looking at a implementation of July 1st, 2016. Regardless of when these reports are being presented to us and to the Agency of Education, is that correct?
implementation being what now? What would that be?
Whatever a new SU boundary may look like, or consolidation, whether
Actually,
forced or unforced.
Actually, I guess I don't feel competent to speak to the implementation date because, frankly, with, if David Bickford were on board still as the superintendent of OSU, then I think the time frame would be different. But I think you have new superintendents who are, but I think it's something where,
What I'm trying to get to is some form of solid ground that folks in your community
Right.
can get a grasp on.
but I think as I said in my testimony, I think a time frame of a year is really reasonable for drawing up a plan to be presented to the board a year from now, and that the board needs to, you know, hold the superintendents, you know, accountable for progress. But it's not.
And where is the difference between now and a year from now, or from 2 years
The
ago?
difference between now and a year from now is stakeholders having a voice, school boards retaining control, perhaps even votes by the towns. This is not something where, you're dealing with, just not only SU issues, but local issues. You really need to allow stakeholders to have a voice in this. And it just can't be that the board is, you know, mandating that we go to OSU and question, like, what did we have to say about that? And I think that it's just, because I'm the one who's hearing about that, and I'm hearing also that, that there might be interest in, our pairing with, the Randolph Supervisory Union. It's just, but I think right now it's too unsettled. But I think a year is the time needed to, for everyone to have a voice.
In the
I'm sorry.
6-month extension that we granted the last year, what efforts were made? We were pretty clear back then.
No, I understand that.
And what the majority of this board felt, and we made that extension. Maybe you weren't were you elected in March, or?
No, actually, I was just replacing a school board member at that point who had self-recalled, as we say, thankfully.
What happened?
What happened was H 883. What happened was 2 new superintendents being hired. What happened was, I think I've laid out the change and the uncertainty there. And that was occupying people. And I think in fairness to the superintendent's group, they did present you with a plan as you requested. It just doesn't happen to be one we agree with.
Okay.
And we've indicated that.
Madam Secretary.
Certainly the turnover was part of the agency's consideration, and as you move forward and look for a plan.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. Sorry. No, it has to do with my not wearing those things for the
Certainly
mower,
the
right?
turnover in the area was part of our consideration as well,
Yeah,
and that was something that weighed heavily on us. I assume that you're aware that statewide, we have 30% turnover of superintendents annually and 30% turnover of principals. In particular with principals, we're seeing it's not evenly distributed, that there's some portions of the state that have a lot of persistent turnover, and it's often aggravated by local situations.
No,
Please let me finish.
I'm sorry.
And I'm not saying that as a directive, I'm just saying I hope that's part of your consideration, and I express that to encourage you to feel some sense of urgency around this.
Yeah.
And similarly, and I'd be happy to share some of our numbers, but I think one of the things that was on the table in the legislature this year was to eliminate the hold harmless provision. And in that case, Rochester be looking at an effective equalized homestead tax rate that's 60% higher than their current tax rate. And I need you to feel some urgency, because my concern is that you have a school that your kids can go to. And not moving with some urgency may leave you with even fewer options than you have currently.
2 points, I guess. I think I was reflecting that in my comments about the state, about the legislature changing the funding mechanisms for local schools. I mean, I think we're acutely aware of that, and if we weren't, then the emails we get from Steve Dale over here from Vermont School Board Association, they're explaining in great detail the implications of legislation. But I'd also say, I don't understand why anyone wants to be a superintendent in the first place. It doesn't surprise me that we have retirements or, I mean, it's just God bless them, really.
Absolutely,
Right.
I second that.
But it's also, I think you were a superintendent too, Mrs. Holcomb, or at least, I don't know, whatever. There was a nice little blurb in the newsletter about you, that was, right, Steve Dale's. But we have retirements of 2 key superintendents. David Bickford, who wrote a very thoughtful memo to you guys about the implications of that, and I made sure Meg Powden has a copy of it. I mean, it's just, so part of the groundwork is done if the movement is toward OSU, but it's just, it's these 2 key superintendents who just are retiring, and it's just, there's a learning curve to this, people just trusting, who you are, and just getting to, but it takes time, and that's why we suggested, the year, but, sorry.
Krista?
So I just wanted to clarify, because I know that there was a report in Rochester prepared by Dr. Everett talking about Rochester and sustainability of the school.
Yeah.
So how much of that has been confused with and put in conjunction with this consolidation and merger of the moving of the districts? Because that, to me, that report, and I went and read it, talked more about closing schools, and this isn't talking about closing schools. This is talking about leadership. So how much of that was confused at the local level and entered into the conversation and almost prevented this redistricting from happening?
No, I think the talk about closing schools is just uninformed, and mostly you hear about it from kids, not from adults.
Well, it was a report that was issued to you by Mr. Everett talking about the sustainability
It was a
of schools.
sustainability report, which very clearly indicated what needed to happen for the high school in particular to remain open. And there was a vote by the town there was a vote by the town at a warned meeting. And there was an Australian ballot next day where the town clearly indicated they wanted the high school to remain open. And our principal is proceeding along that line. We have, we've applied for, a personalized learning grant, and we received that, and South Royalton did also. And we're moving ahead. Our principal right now is at the BEST conference with, God love him, one of our middle school science teachers. But that's not something you're hearing from anyone who is, at all informed, and I don't think it's informing this debate really at all.
So you don't think that tainted
No,
this
we're
discussion?
assuming that we're ongoing as a Rochester school that's K to 12.
Are there other questions yes, Stacy?
So I'm thinking about when I took on a job of being a director of a school, and
Yeah.
the whole first year is a tremendous amount of learning, and at the end of
Yeah.
your first year, you're so excited to have your second year to
Yeah.
try to put into practice all the things that you
Yeah.
learn. I'm concerned that a year from now, we're gonna be having this same conversation.
You're
with
not.
even very,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, with very
Yeah.
talented, dedicated superintendents. I think I would be surprised that it wouldn't take a year just to learn who all the players are and what's happening. So I'm wondering, is there some counterbalance? I can see the reason to give the extension, but is there some counterbalance also to have? So a year from now, if there isn't X, or if there isn't some plan,
Again, sorry.
what's going to prevent us from not having the same conversation?
The counterbalance is you guys. The counterbalance is Meg Powden, according to my proposal, in October, after some serious work, with stakeholders, the other superintendent, Bruce Labs, for example, or maybe Brent Kay over in Randolph. The counterbalance is you. In October, she gives you a progress report. What have you done? What progress have you made toward a voluntary consolidation of Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union? It's what do you do with any plan? You ask for progress reports. Just what have you done? Written reports, and then say to her, all right. So what are the other dates in the timeline when you'll be reporting, more to us? But I think the counterbalance is you guys.
Are we all good with that?
Okay.
How about
We
that?
can
Other
exercise that.
questions? I'm sure we have other witnesses that wish to testify.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you for speaking with us today, Chairman Morse, the State Board, Secretary Holcomb. I think Frank really hit a lot of the key points in the conversation that we've been having. A couple things I wanted to add to speak to the amount of progress or lack thereof from December to now. In terms of what we were doing, I think he touched on it. We were, both SUs were in the process of hiring superintendents, having an ongoing conversation about future planning is very difficult to do with either outgoing leadership or not yet in place future leadership. We did consider very, very carefully what you had tasked us to do, and I want to reassure you again that we do take it very seriously. We do feel that an October deadline for a first progress report on the 5 of the 6 Windsor Northwest districts consolidating with those who are similar is fine. We also think that in October we should be able to give you a much more detailed plan to facilitate moving Pittsfield from Windsor Northwest to Windsor Central. We feel we support what Ms. Sperber said in her letter. We do feel that barring some unforeseen roadblock, it is very doable to put their transition, to establish a transition plan for them by October and put that plan in place for June.
So you, just so I'm clear, I mean, we're violating my own rules here, but I've separated this into 2 questions. And what
Sure.
I just heard you say, what the recommendation is that we take a vote today on Pittsfield and move it to the Windsor Central District.
Correct.
And did I just hear you disagree with that?
No, I said that I thought that it was very feasible to have actually not just a progress report on the Pittsfield transition by October, but that it'd be very fairly feasible to have, barring unforeseen roadblocks. We have in Windsor Central a superintendent who is in place. We have a district on our end that does not have nearly the complexities of moving an operating school. So we're talking about moving financial records. So I believe that we can come to October with a more of a detailed implementation, not just a progress report on Pittsfield, but more of a detailed implementation plan that says we're going to be transitioning here, here, and here, with the ultimate goal, which we I guess are supporting, of allowing Pittsfield to transition by the end of the 14-15 school year. And so there's how I was trying to speak to the 2 pieces of that question. I think it's important to when last we spoke, one of the comments that I had made that I wanted to revisit that I think is important to consider is this process began a number of years ago when Mr. Poljacek said that really this time perhaps he was really going to retire, and then Commissioner Villaseca said, well, we're going to do a study. Now, with all and we sat in across from the Dome in the commissioner's office, and all had good intentions that this procedure was going to be done, and it was not going to involve an interim superintendent, nor was it going to involve hiring. The whole idea was to have this process complete and in place so that Mr. Poljasek's retirement would coincide with the transition of one SU to another. Between the issues of the financial study, between the various complications that arose during the process, I think it's important to note that there were a lot of good intentions in that room, and there's still good intentions now. This process is perhaps a lot deeper and a lot more complicated than just moving a name from a column to another column. I think that one of the things that we're finding now that speaks to what the Secretary had referenced is that part of the problem is the idea of looking at boundary changes upon a projected retirement, as opposed to as part of a bigger, more holistic, top-down plan. I also think, and I said this again, I think part of the problem as we were trying to negotiate with the initial 2-2-2 configurations, and we're finding some resistance and pushback from some quarters, is that, again, while the state board has the power to redistrict, the power seems to stop there. It would be nice if there would be some abilities, or at either the agency or at the state board level, to help facilitate those transitions, so that as a transition opportunity becomes available, whether there's a tiger team, whether there's more rules or statute, or an arbitration process, something that allows the state board's will to be conveyed to the communities without quite so much friction and discussion. Because my final comments would be back to this gentleman's, Mark's remarks about, the effects that this process has had. When the process began, we were looking at wrapping up a study of consolidated transportation, which has gone nowhere. We had started putting together a plan. One of the problems in small schools we have, especially with being able to access Medicare, is getting good quality nursing at a small school on a consistent basis. We're putting together a plan to have SU-wide medical and health, medical and health personnel, and share that across the SU. That plan never got off the drawing board. Our technology plan is 2 years out of date. All those initiatives have been held up because we've been wrestling with this, and maybe we should. Maybe this is the most important thing on our plate, and we shouldn't be rearranging our technology deck chairs when the Windsor Northwest boat is sinking. But there definitely have been, implications to student outcomes and implications to hiring and financials situations in the SU, and I think part of that is due to the length of this process, and that is due to some of the inefficiencies and lack of structure and tools to move the process forward.
Thank you. Are there questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Is there any other member of the public that wishes to address this issue? Gentlemen, if you would introduce yourselves, please.
I'll begin. I'm David Bickford. I'm superintendent in Orange Windsor Supervisory Union.
And I'm Bruce Labs, the incoming superintendent for Orange Windsor.
And my name is Don Shaw. I'm the chair for OSU.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I came prepared to address one point, and in the course of the conversation, I'm going to elect, with your permission, to address a second point. The first point I'd like to bring up is financial, and the second is organizational or timing. I wrote on June 10th to Mr. Altimus my concern about the financial condition of Windsor Northwest Supervisory Union. I have some remarks in the form of a memo to Chairperson Morris that I will share with you at the end of my remarks. What concerns me is the reports in the public press of the financial condition of Windsor Northwest. Given the fact that there is a strong likelihood that one or more constituent town school districts would come in the direction of Orange Windsor. My concern is for a clear and shared financial reporting. In preparation for the May 27th revote in Bethel, the voters in Bethel heard from the board, their auditor, that there was an additional deficit projected of something on the order of $425,000. This is on top of previous reports of deficits ranging upward of $500,000. And my request is to the state board, if Windsor Northwest constituent districts are reassigned, that you authorize a forensic audit of the books, because in my estimation, it's important to dig deep. And I see the secretary shaking her head. This is very important, not only for the financial accuracy, but for the perception of the voters in the towns being reassigned, and for the members of the town school districts to whom they would be assigned. And I think it's pretty obvious. But there's a question of cost here. And I know that when I talked with Vaughn, he brought up to my attention the $150,000 of transition money. I'm suggesting that because it is within the purview of the State Board of Education to make those reassignments, that you then ensure a clear balance sheet. So I'm saying that I'm asking you to take on the fiscal responsibility of overseeing that audit so that those transition monies can be used strictly for transition as opposed to having to clear the books. My second comment is about the timing. And sitting with my business manager and my successor and my board chair, realizing that in October we're beginning our budget season, and knowing all that has to go into preparing a plan. And also realizing that I have kept our boards and board members apprised of the developments from the agency's original recommendation to reassign school districts to 2 and 2, all the way through the superintendent's recommendations that are in the letter signed by 5 superintendents. And you haven't heard any particular objections coming from Orange Windsor board members, because they felt, and they were really clear with me, that if the state board were going to take action, we would welcome whomever the board assigned to be with us. At the same time, we recognize that there would have to be a great deal of planning and resources to go into that planning. And one of the great fortunes or misfortunes in my life is when I did my doctoral work, it was on transformation. And one of the elements in transformation, and I can't tell you who the researcher was, that said, when you have limited resources, one of 2 things happens. Either the quality of the product is diminished, or the amount of time necessary to accomplish it is extended. Now, I mean, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't want to hear anything about extending time, because it seems like it's been an eternity since we've been discussing this. On the other hand, we can do it or do it well. I think we heard some comments here today that certainly would give me rise to some optimism. This isn't about stopping the process or keeping necessarily what we have, but it's engaging in a conversation about what the outcome might be. Bruce and I were talking on the way up. Bruce has a real strength and inclination towards strategic planning. And as we were sitting back there, and I don't know if you want to jump in, Bruce, but you were saying that we would need time to do an honest strategic plan. And what do you figure the amount?
A year.
A year to do a strategic plan. This isn't just planning to plan. And so, at the risk of urging...
Strategic plan in 2 days?
At the risk of urging you to kick the can down the road even further, I think we have the conditions here that we haven't had before. I know Vaughn is concerned about how costs would be apportioned, When we centralized special education 2 years ago at Orange Windsor, we took our time, we laid out the logistics, and we presented to the boards 3 options on funding the consolidated special education. And it was a transparent process where the strengths and liabilities of each of the options are laid out. As a result, the board, in its wisdom, took a sort of middle-of-the-road attitude where some town school districts were being paid a greater assessment, some town districts were being paid were paying about the same, and others were not paying as much. The proof in the pudding there was when we went to town meeting, all 5 town school district budgets passed. And I think that has to do with the amount of planning, the transparency, and the forthright representation of what we were doing and why. So, I came in here expecting you to vote today. I want to lay on the table the need for an audit. I think we need to be deliberate in how we anticipate these outcomes. We may be able to do it by October or January. My question is, can we do the best job possible?
If I could jump in, it just amazes me that you can move 30 miles west and be a stranger in a strange land, and that's what I am, moving from New Hampshire right on the border. There seems to be a sense of urgency that I want to talk about here today. These kids are graduating. They don't have the skills they need in order to do it, and a lot of our kids, younger kids as well. I intend to ask tonight at our executive board meeting for the permission from the executive board to begin a strategic plan for Orange Windsor. Whether or not the other SU is involved, I guess is really up to you. I don't think we have time to wait to find out whether they want to be a part of things. I don't like force. I don't think that that's what we ought to be doing, but there is a sense of urgency here. And, you know, what we will do first is collect data to find out exactly where we are. But I don't even, unless you determine whether this is going to be a marriage, we're going to move on. And I guess I'm getting a little ahead of my board when I say that, but we can't do a strategic plan and have the other district that might join us in a year or two and be sitting out there waiting to decide whether they're going to join us. And I don't see any teeth in this unless there is some way of compelling us to really have a meaningful relationship. I know I'm an unknown, but I have a track record, and the secretary knows what that track record is because she was in a neighboring district. And I don't want to present a big ego to you either. I'll work hard. We'll work hard as a board, and we'll get some things done. But I just need to impress upon you that if you want to kick this down the road, there's going to be a real disjointed nature to it. And, you know, I think we can do this, and I think we can do it together. A strategic plan doesn't compel you to do anything in particular. It gives you information about who you are and opportunities about where you want to go. It's going to take some time.
I'm not clear what you're arguing for.
I'm arguing for you to make a decision where we're going to go here, and because we're going to move at some point.
Are you talking 6 months, or are you talking the year that's been suggested by other people?
Or you want it right now?
Or do you want to do it today?
Well, I mean, we're going to start a process. We're going to start a process. in Orange Windsor?
6 months, a year, or today? That's the question,
Today.
sir. Today?
Today.
And making it happen.
Okay.
And can I just ask if with budget, because you talked about that, and schools have to make their budgets in October, and if we're waiting to January, is that putting out another year and a half? And is that actually creating more problems by putting it off instead of, like you're advocating, is just do it now so we know and we can and move on?
If we're moving in a particular direction, who's going to compel Orange Windsor to go that way? You know, I mean, who's going to compel them? I'd like to date Orange Windsor. I don't want to marry them without dating them.
Or Windsor Northwest?
Or, excuse me, Windsor Northwest. Well, but how are we going to develop this relationship if one party isn't sure they want to be a part of the relationship?
Mr. Chairman, do you have a few words you'd like to add?
I do. I agree with Mr. Ladd's assumption of the strategic planning. We have the dialogue to do tonight, but I think that's the direction we're going to go. I would like the board to make a decision today. The time frame for implementation could be pushed down the road, but it would be very beneficial to have a direction of where we can go. So that's.
Thank you. Other, Mark?
Having recently gone through, I'm board chair of an SU as well, and recently we had our superintendent there the past year. I'm curious if Meg is in the room as well, but the discussion, thank you, the discussion that the boards had while hiring superintendents and going through the interview process, that there was, you know, full disclosure of what you've gotten yourself, or could be getting yourself into. And if there's been any communication between the two new superintendents at all.
There's been no communication other than Meg and I met each other this morning, so this is a good opportunity. As far as the hiring process, as we came up in the car today, nobody even knows whether this is going to happen. So how could they inform me that it was going to happen until it does? And I choose to focus on the things I can control. And I think I can control the beginning of a process with my board around strategic planning so that we can figure out the opportunities that we have. These discussions have to be around school improvement, and they have to be around student improvement, not political boundaries or money or all those other things. And I know where I'm sitting right now, and I know how these things go. But those are my focuses, and that's why I think there's a sense of urgency. If you choose to wait, we're going to go in one direction. We want to, because there's a sense of urgency for those kids in Orange Windsor. And I have a special ed background. I've been a principal for a long time. I've been a superintendent for a long time. We need to move and not wait. And if you want to wait, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to do this.
Are there other questions of these three witnesses? If not, thank you very much. Are there other members of the public that wish to be heard on this issue? If not,
Two hands.
oh, I'm sorry. Please step forward. There's someone in the back.
Meg.
It's Meg?
John first.
She's in go ahead. Speak last, that's why I was
Good morning.
Would you you told me, but would you tell the full board how many days left you have of your employment? I won't take anything away from your credibility as a witness, but.
Thank you. John Pluljasic, Superintendent, retired.
My son came home this past weekend, and I said to him, what was that toy that you had as a kid where the arms were pulled out and the legs were pulled out and they were rubbery and snapped back? He said, Stretch Armstrong. I said, that's my name. That's the way I've felt for the past 4.5 years with this initiative, pulled in every direction by every town, every school board, and many of my colleagues. It's why we've not reached, in many ways, a happy resolution. I can understand your frustration, Chairman Morris, reading the article in the Herald here recently. I think you're going to like my book that comes out. The title is Size 6 in Lima Beans. Not everyone wears size 6 shoes, and not everyone likes lima beans. And it applies to this initiative. It's been very difficult to make everyone happy, and I think that's what we've been trying to do, and that's why we are not at a happy resolution. Pittsfield should go in that direction. It has my recommendation. The reason the other 5 districts are in the proposal to slide over to Orange Windsor is the only one left. As you know, there is resistance from all of the other SUs or their boards or whatever. Many superintendents are retiring and moving on and going to pass the torch. I'm going to pass the consolidation binder to Meg Powden. This is it. It's also chapter 6 in my book called Consolidation. And in here is evidence of welcoming cooperation and resistance. Resistance from Orange South, resistance from Washington West, resistance from Windsor Northwest, to just about every plan that's been out there. So I don't have a better plan to offer you. I want you to move forward and make a decision. I think the time frame of October and December seems reasonable to put things in motion and then make a decision. This year alone, we have a turnover of staff. We have about 155 staff members, support staff and professional members. We have a turnover of 36. Now that is in part just natural, and some informal exiting interviews, it's in part because of insecurity, job insecurity. And it's pretty significant. We've had typically 8 or 10 turnovers per year, but now we have 36 today, and of those 3 or 4 are administrative positions. It's a small district. I think you're being misled to suggest that, or to hear that Windsor Northwest has financial problems. It does not. Bethel does, and has historically. And what's missing in the history bank right now is that this time the Bethel financial problem is due in part to the town, and that's what's being ignored. It's not just the school district of Bethel and not management of SU, it's the town as well that participated in that deficit problem. We did ask for a state audit already. You've been asked to conduct a forensic audit. I would agree. We asked for a state audit immediately upon hearing about this newest deficit after it was cleaned up a few years ago and the state auditor's office declined. I don't know where you go from there. I think probably the last thing to offer to you is that the lack of, shall I say, stability or the concerns, Carl mentioned them before, we really wanted to move forward too. We wanted to move forward with transportation, consolidation of health services, consolidation of maintenance service and so on, everything we had to do to make our small district work. And we put them on hold. So financially now, we're up near $15 million for 6 districts. And those 6 districts, by the way, what makes it complex is 3 of those districts are K-12 non-operating. A 4th district, Stockbridge, is K-6 with 7-12 choice. The other 2 are pre-K-12 operating districts. And those 6 districts are in 3 counties. Never mind divide them. I want to know who even arranged them initially. Who was thinking when they arranged? But if you can't figure this out after today or in the 3 or 6 months, I suggest you do what Tropical Storm Irene did. It divided the districts. If you go back and look at what the Rivers did, it almost suggests where the districts ought to go by way of geographical boundaries created by Tropical Storm Irene. Vaughn was very pleasant in giving you a 2-year history. This has a 4-year plus history, at least. And some of us, Mr. Morris and I at least, and Carl, have been around for the entire thing. I'm getting rather tired of it. I don't know about you. But given that I only have 1 day left, I wanted an opportunity to say thank you. It's been nice to work with you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Meg, do you wish to testify?
Before what? Before what?
I don't think so. But
No?
I think we're all, December? December?
Hold the band. Why don't you let me?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, and congratulations on your new assignment.
Thank you.
And your binder.
I will accept that. I am looking forward to my new assignment, so thank you. I hadn't planned on...
Who are you?
I'm Meg Powden. I'm the incoming superintendent at Windsor Northwest. I hadn't planned on testifying, but Mr. Labs brought me to the table. And we did meet this morning, and I look forward to an ongoing working relationship with Mr. Labs. But I wanted to state that I totally understand why, new incoming superintendents, we're all anxious to get going, to work with our boards and our districts and improve student achievement. However, in this instance, as I stated in my letter that I submitted to the board, I need time, I need some flexibility, because Mr. Labs is saying, just force this marriage. Well, I'm not convinced that's where we're going to end up, that the 5 districts are all going to go to Orange Windsor. I need time to talk with the superintendents, the regional superintendents. There are possibilities that might happen in Addison Central for one of our towns. It's already been spoken to about Orange Southwest might be an option for another town. So I'm just coming forward to say, I'm happy to date Mr. Labs, but don't force a marriage. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there other members of the public that wish to be heard? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is A.J. Rubin. I'm a member of the Pittsfield School Board. I'm not sure whether you were going to address that.
We are going to address
Items
it
separately.
I've separated the issues, so if you could wait.
Absolutely.
We're going to take up the first part of this, the Windsor Northwest, and we'll deal with the Pittsfield issue as a separate vote. So
No
if you could
problem.
wait a second, that would be great.
Sure thing.
Is the board ready to take some action on the first part of this, or do you want? Vaughn, do you want to briefly?
1 minute.
I want to call the question on the motion we haven't made yet.
Oh, I'm not, no.
Actually, I found today extraordinarily encouraging. I truly have. I'd just like to briefly point out that the movement to Orange Windsor is much more than the one that's left. I mentioned the twinkle in Superintendent Bickford's eye more than once. There are some ideas for real change here. I was very encouraged by Superintendent Lab's comments that we have been unusual, the secretary and the board assigning a year to it. When we talk about the original proposal, January 1st, or Ms. Uller's proposed amendment, these people are not starting from scratch. We have Mr. Andrews' numbers. He just went through them again very kindly. They still work. The beginning of a year-long study is already there. They're going to start in the middle of it. And the one other point I would make for Mr. Labs that I think is important is if you were to act today, the next 6 months would be gathering the same information that the secretary is recommending you put in the report.
So, I'm sorry, when you said the numbers are still there, I think you're saying that we already have very good numbers on Bethel?
Yes. Oh, well, on the freeing of resources in the supervisory union.
So those
that
numbers
they
there.
can use. They basically, they can start without a full financial analysis. They can use that as a basis and move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Stephen, I'd like to make a motion for this item 1. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
No, just for the benefit of board members and everyone else, I believe what Sean Marie is going to do is take the recommendation from the agency, and she may make some minor changes in her motion. So if you...
So what I'd like to change is that I would like I'd like to change the date from January 1st, 2015 to December 1st, 2014, and add that a report will be given to the board, or will be given to the agency for the board by October 1st of 2014. And this does not address any financial piece that has been asked or recommended.
Is there a second to that motion? Mark?
I'll second it. So we're still looking at January 20th decision date.
Right,
Yeah. Okay, we're just asking for different reporting dates.
correct.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought we were looking, I thought...
It could be a December.
It can be a December date, but I just want to allow the time, if need be, for the agency and other parties to review January 1st to January 20th does not give much time.
So you're not changing that first date in the leading paragraph?
No, I mean, I don't see any reason to. I think that there can certainly be an item in December if the agency and parties are ready for a vote on January 20th. I'm willing to amend that as well, but that was not my intent.
Okay.
And I guess the only, I know I seconded that, the only concern I have is, October to December is very heavy budget times, and it sounds like, with Bethel involved, it could be a lot of work for Meg, and, they're taking on these positions, I realize.
There's been a lot of progress that's been made, and the attitude seems to be a little more...
I get that. I get that, and I just want to put it out there that I'll be abstaining from this vote because I'm chair of Addison Central, and I don't think it's fair that I vote on this either, just so everyone knows that.
Any other discussion on the board? If not, yes.
Again, I guess I'm just going back to Lab's comment about if we put this off again, it puts off discussions, and there's nothing about implementation that has to happen soon, that these reports can't happen, but to know that merger will happen. Because I know I see superintendents here from other areas that are still coming to these meetings because they're worried that all of a sudden we're going to throw them a couple of towns or two and a couple districts, and I think it's hindering a lot of progress in that area, and I guess that's my concern. The more that we wait, we're hindering progress that could be happening, because now again it's like, well, maybe we could have a different configuration, but we already decided last December you had it 6 months, and then that configuration never happened. So magically something might happen now over in this area or that area, and I just think there is a lot of instability within this region, which is affecting kids, which is affecting boards, initiatives, and I am a little remiss about pushing this off yet again. If it's the will of the majority, I definitely would go with that, but I see a need to push this sooner rather than later. And I guess when Stacey, you asked a really good question, like where does this stop? Like, it does stop with us, and we can keep kicking it down, or we can finally make a decision, because we are trying to make everybody happy, and sometimes you can't make everybody happy.
Well, I think, assuming this motion passes, and I don't know if it will or not, but what the message folks from this area ought to take back with them is this board is very serious. You saw that in our meeting last December, and I think what's being proposed here today is a courtesy to, and some respect for local control, for you folks to come up with your own decision. But if anyone left this room today thinking we're just going to keep kicking this down the road, I think that would be a mistake. Yeah.
I just want to say, this is the first time I've also, and I want to appreciate what Superintendent Lab said, because that's the first time I've really heard people put the viability of these schools for the students at the center. And I just want to reemphasize the urgency here, because what's happening is that you are experiencing distress in some of these districts, and the longer we let that distress continue, the more we're hurting some of the students that we're here to serve. And I'm very, very concerned about that, and I really appreciate the priority you've put to making sure that we're set up to support the needs of our children.
I second that.
All right, it's not seeing any other discussion, we'll take a vote on the motion. Is everyone clear on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we have approved the motion extending the Windsor Northwest Supervisor.
One abstention, Mr. Chair.
And one abstention, pardon me. All right. Sir, would you like to speak quickly on the Pittsfield part of this?
Hi again, my name is AJ Rubin. I'm from the Pittsfield School Board. Just briefly, I want to appreciate the board for, I think, going to approve our town's request to let us move next July to the Windsor Central and to Superintendent Worth's jurisdiction. And just to put out there that our town is doing that because we hope for better outcomes, but we have a lot of trepidation. It's really hard to tell what will happen when we move. We hope we will save money, and we hope our kids' educational outcomes will improve, but we do not know. And we're just really grateful that we have a partner in Superintendent Worth who's spent a lot of time trying to crunch the numbers and talking with us and trying to make us comfortable. That's what the rest of the supervisory union districts really deserve, is to have a communication and a sense of security with the people they're about to move in with, which I hope that in the next 4 or 5 months you can get that from these studies. But just to put out there that we don't know what's going to happen when we move to Windsor. We hope for the best. We don't really think it's going to save any money. And the money problems are really issues that are not going to be addressed by consolidation. But we're hopeful, and we appreciate your giving our town the ability to make this move. It certainly is what our town voted on at last town meeting. Thank you.
Is there a motion, Mr.? Yes.
I move the secretary's recommendation as written.
And I'll second that.
And that's been seconded by Sean Marie, and that's item 2 on the agenda. Alice, do you want to speak to this? Yeah, we don't need any more quotes from the
from the
Randolph Herald.
7 days, from 7 days.
Going to be a little more careful talking to that
gonna-
reporter next time, I think.
Thanks for letting me have an opportunity to speak. I'm not going to take much time, but I do want to make a couple of comments, and thank you, AJ. So Windsor Central Supervisory Union, I'm the Superintendent Alice Thomas and Worth of Windsor Central Supervisory Union in Woodstock. And we feel that we have a very strong and growing supervisory union. My board members feel it's imperative that we grow because we're having a lot of trouble sustaining the quality of education that our kids deserve. And yet we are historically a pretty high-performing district by all accounts, but we're struggling to provide the educational opportunities that this board supports. And I'd like to make a couple of illustrations of that. You're going to be talking today and hopefully approving the proposed accountability and assessment strategies of the agency. You recently supported and approved school quality standards. You've approved in the past, perhaps other members, the Vermont standards, framework of standards and learning opportunities, and I believe you all endorse the Common Core. We are unable to implement those things in my district, which is a high-performing, committed district with board members who are very supportive of all of those things. Those are wonderful, powerful opportunities and tools for the children of our state. But they can't be implemented because we're under tremendous stress as our schools, our enrollment's declining, and our costs are escalating. So we go into this partnership with Pittsfield as an opportunity to expand our human and financial resources so that we can perhaps do better. I have 4 of 7 of my schools that are managed by part-time principals. They cannot provide the leadership day in and day out that are required of those standards which you have endorsed. We have schools that have part-time nurses, part-time physical education personnel. I can't, and had this conversation about 2 months ago with the agency, I cannot meet the standard of the physical education requirements that were just passed in the school quality standards, because to do so would mean a classroom teacher would need to be cut, okay? My boards refer to this as cannibalizing our schools, and they've been very clear that they don't want to do this. They are engaged right now in a consolidation study within our own supervisory union to try to perhaps find some opportunities for magnet schools or other structures by which we can improve the opportunities for our kids. So I wanted to be sure, while I had a little bit of a soapbox, to share that with you because it's germane to the bigger conversation which you've been wrestling with so diligently. My folder, by the way, is only 2 years old. It's half the size of John's. But I also have the consolidation folder. The one thing that I would like the board to be clear about is my board for 2 years, and I'm in my, just finishing my 3rd year as superintendent, about to start 2 more years, as if all things go with my district, and perhaps longer. My board has been in conversation for 2 years informally with Pittsfield, with AJ, with Kristen Sperber, who's the wonderful board chair who has been shepherding this through her community. We have very positive conversations. We talk about kids, we talk about what we want. We have not made a conclusive decision. I do have a few board members who have asked the question, what is in this for us? Fortunately, that conversation has changed radically over the last 6 months because now they realize that as we continue this road in the state of Vermont, the more we have mine and yours, us and them, the more our kids lose day in and day out. So where we stand right now, we will be meeting next week again with Chairman Kristen Sperber, and she will be coming hopefully with other board members from Pittsfield to discuss our merger and our future with the full WCSU board on July 14th. We have discussed some what we think are pretty friendly, reasonable approaches to managing our assessment to them. They're a non-operating school. Our consultation with Vaughn leads me to believe we would be playing by the rules, but we certainly would expect this board, based on your previous discussions and my understanding of you, we certainly would welcome your support in negotiating what's reasonable in the best interest of all parties. So thank you very much. If there's anything I can do to help with the bigger picture, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'll call the question on the second part of this report, the motion from Bill Mathis. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
1 abstention.
And 1 abstention.
Just to
So
remain consistent.
it's by a majority vote. We're going to take a quick break, but before I do that, we have a new board member that will be joining us next month. A student member from Hazen Union High School, Dylan McAllister, and thank you for coming today, and I hope this morning hasn't scared you off from your interest in serving on the State Board of Education. We'll take a 10-minute break now and be back at 11 o'clock. Agenda item E, statewide assessment, appropriate use of test scores. I'll call on Bill Mathis. And then the point today is, we've talked about this topic a lot. Bill has done a lot of research and writing, and this is not warned as to take a vote today, but my hope is that we would come to a pretty solid conclusion and put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Is this you?
Bill.
Okay, you have version 7 in front of you. Obviously, I like to edit a great deal, even my own work. I want you to know that I do have version 7A up here, which differs from version 7 only in terms of some editorial chaff that got cleaned up and a couple of words got left out, but no substantive kinds of differences. Do people have copies that want copies? I guess so.
Version 7.
Basically, I would just put this out for discussion and any questions that you might have, and go from there. We had a pretty long discussion about it last time. The feedback I got in the meantime said, basically, it had a negative tone to it. I looked at it and said, yep, well, it did. And I think the tone on this version is much better than that. One thing that, are a couple of things that have happened since we've last looked at it as a board, is that Rebecca and I have gone over this a couple of 3 times by email and polished and worked on it a great deal to make sure that we were had the right ideas, had the research behind them, a lot of technical reading that went into it. Michael Hawk is also here, and he had sent you folks a letter, which is also in your packet today, which goes on for some 4 or 5 pages. And we were just talking briefly at the break that Michael seems happier, if not downright happy, with the latest version of things. And I did take a lot of his points and did some modifications accordingly. He had raised some good points. That's it. The front page is basically preamble and sets the context and the stage, and then what we have is the different points which we can talk about as you wish, and then also the resolution that's there. So, Sean Marie, you want to lead off?
Well, I just would first like to say that I was really, really appreciative of Michael Hawk's letter. I've been on the board 3 years now, and I think sometimes his passion for assessment sort of comes forward, and I just, I really appreciate that what looks like a lot of time and thoughtfulness went into this letter, talking about assessment and keeping us on point for why we might have such a resolution. So, Michael, I would like to thank you. I've seen you come in front of the board many times. I really like the positive tone in the version 7 that's in front of us. And I did read the points, not the whole thing, to the standards board last week, and they were very appreciative and supportive of this direction. I did remind them that we, as a board, that this can only be a resolution or a statement. We have really not the actual ability to sort of enforce any of it except through our rulemaking. But they were very appreciative of the points. As I said, I did not read word for word the 4 pages, just the intent and the points. So thank you, Bill, for all your work on this.
Okay, and I see that it being used in terms of a statement to the field and also to our national organizations and also to groups like the licensing board. I think this has a lot of implications for them, and it also gets into our role as a policy-making board. This becomes a policy statement which would guide the secretary and the administration in terms of the direction we're going. Mark?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to try and take the perspective of just a person that makes pizzas all day, and I sit on a school board, and there's a couple of, and I may go down paragraph by paragraph, and second paragraph, and I'm going off from the version, I guess the same version 7, but I just printed out different, so it's not 7A. The second paragraph, I guess a question I would have, because we, as school board members, we look towards the leadership, superintendents, principals, the agency of education, and so forth, and having just had a great conversation earlier about maybe some of the dysfunction in all that, those relationships. how do we enforce the second paragraph? How does that get enforced?
Is that EQS, the link
Okay.
right from here?
Yeah.
Which on the first page?
This right here?
The whole yeah.
This
I
is
mean,
from
and What I mean
EQS.
is, I know, but what I'm saying
Number
is.
2, or no, the second paragraph on page 1.
Just the second paragraph.
Read the
as a
first
whole.
3 words.
Yeah,
These rules were designed.
Okay. make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay. Because I guess when we know that we're not functioning in a school and we know we're breaking the rules, does the Agency of Education have enough resources to follow up in the schools when things aren't happening when they're supposed to be happening?
Oh, that's a huge question,
Yeah.
delightful
Okay,
question, and I can see the secretary is just wanting, is chafing.
No, and I know, and but I think we saw a little bit of that this morning, and I think that's a frustration for school board members, is, we don't know we don't know all that everybody knows that's in the business or in the industry of education, and so we rely on the experts, and we try not micromanage our administrators, but at some point, when you start questioning some of this stuff, how do we, how does the Agency of Education, we see that as, how do they come into our school districts, how do they come into our SUs and enforce some of this stuff? Okay, and I just leave it there, not necessarily to be answered. Third paragraph, unless you want, do you want?
Or do you want to, why don't you go through everything, then we'll answer
Just
it one by
go
one.
through your list.
I mean, I just,
I think she should.
okay, and so the
Go through
third
your
paragraph is what is the measure that we're using? And I guess that's sort of the overall assessment piece.
Okay,
And then in the fourth paragraph, who is us and how? And that's more, can give us insight into the skills, knowledge. I mean, who are we talking about there? Maybe that's just me and my lack of,
The collective us.
the collective us, okay.
That's good.
And then, I'm probably being a little nitpicky here, but this would be the second page, I believe, under test development criteria. We're referencing the American Educational Research Association, National Council on Measurement of Education, and the American Psychological Association. I know we read some stuff on them. And why are we referencing them and not somebody else? Somebody might be opposed to them.
because
or
they're the
contrary
only
to them.
ones who have done this, and they are the authorities, and they're.
And that's why they accepted, yes, okay,
That's
thank
good
you.
housekeeping seal of approval.
Okay. Consumer Reports has tested it,
Yeah.
okay. And then, under resolutions, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one down, I guess that's, like, my notes are, how so, how do we know that?
The overemphasis on the bottom one on the page, is that the one you're looking
Yeah,
at?
yeah.
Okay.
And then, and in sharing this with some of my, fellow board members, and what they've picked up a little bit from minute meetings and so forth, the fear that we may be having high-stake assessments for graduation, which I try to assure them that that is not the direction we're moving in, but to make sure that, from a lay person's perspective, that isn't what we're doing.
Are we not explicit enough here?
I was gonna say,
I thought it was, but I'm just passing that on.
I was thinking that's why this exists.
I hope we were explicit on that.
I think the fourth, whereas it is widely recognized that standardized testing is inadequate, is pretty explicit.
And I also shared this with some colleagues, and they were really excited about this. And their only question was, how would we ever know about this? And that goes back to one of our goals about communication and making sure people in the field get something like this, because they're like, you guys are, this is amazing. Like, we feel so supported as educators that this is direction. And just how do we share that more rapidly with all teachers, with all educators, and just just telling you that I love this version, and that's why I'm so excited to share it with colleagues. And they really appreciated it too.
I think we do need to get it out. I think we need to send it to educators. We need to send it to local boards. And we need to make it part of the assessment and accountability plans that Rebecca's going to talk about in just a minute, I'm sure. And we also need to push it nationally. But let's go back to the beginning.
Did we get all yours, Mark?
Yeah, I'm good.
Krista, did you have other remarks?
No, I mean, I was reading it.
I could hear
This is a
that
great
again,
version.
you
This is
know.
a great version. And then, I get to the end, I'm like, it gets better. I'm like, we're not even just talking about the Vermont anymore. This is going, and so it was.
Shall we hear from Michael then?
Bill? Or Bill?
Sorry?
Bill, too?
Just Michael.
Oh, just Michael. Thank you.
Bill, do you want to talk about testing?
Yes.
I guess we would, and you've been working on this with Bill, and we'd like to get your reaction to
Well,
this.
I have to say that, not with him, but I want to thank the board, and Bill in particular. My letter to you, I think, was based on version 4, is that right, Bill? And the changes, I agree with you completely. The changes I see today, I think, will be a better approach to actually having the board reach the goals they have behind this paper. And frankly, when I first read it, I was kind of like you. I'm married to a teacher. I've been a teacher. I've been your test director in Vermont for since 2004. And I joked with Rebecca that if all the suggestions that were in there about how we're killing kids' love for learning and driving away good teachers, I said, Rebecca, you really ought to take me out and shoot me if I've been leading the state in that direction around assessment. So, I really appreciate the tone. And frankly, I thought in the first versions, or version 4 anyway, that it would be embraced by the choir, but the people you want to get to, people like me, would have dismissed it as just a political diatribe. But I think that this is really a document that the agency can use as we have new initiatives come up that will involve assessment. We can look at this, and what I see there is the board has demonstrated their knowledge of how assessment is useful, but also a lot of the risks and problems that can emerge from assessment. And in that way, I think the broad message I get from your paper at this point, Bill, is that you're supporting assessment, but you're not going to put up with any shenanigans. And I admire that, and I think it's something I would be proud to go to show to my colleagues nationally, that this is how my board looks at this. And by the way, I particularly like the fact, and this kind of goes back to my boss needing to shoot me, that
It's not.
You're not on.
I don't do that.
sometimes, some days I go home,
together.
I sometimes joke that I'm kind of like the dentist of education, that you need my work, but you don't really like seeing me. So. But anyway, I particularly appreciate the fact that the paper now starts out saying there's a role for these kind of tests, but it's a somewhat limited role. Here's what it is. And then the paper goes on to say, here are the things we can't or shouldn't do. And so, I very much appreciate that. If I could just throw this one out, I still have 2 small things that in an email Bill sent me, he suggested these might be a matter of semantics. I will be fine if you don't change these, Bill, but I do want to put this out for the board to consider. My first concern is about the generalized use of the term standardized to describe tests that I think you're actually talking about the statewide accountability assessments that came out of No Child Left Behind. But in fact, standardized applies to all kinds of tests, including performance assessments, that they don't work unless that they're administered by a common set of rules, that they're scored with a common set of guidelines, and that we interpret them according to purpose. And so my one fear is that if we leave the term standardized in there broadly throughout the paper, that when we're working on performance assessments in the future and we say we need to standardize it, that people might say, no, your board said we don't like standardized tests. And I think that there could be an easy fix to this, because I understand that sort of in the common vernacular of the country, people refer to standardized tests and they're thinking about No Child Left Behind. You could put in maybe one sentence that says, throughout this paper, we use the term standardized test to describe the statewide accountability assessments that have come out of No Child Left Behind, but we acknowledge that standardization is something that applies to a lot of different kinds of tests. But something along that, so that they know you're actually talking, and your concerns on a national level are about test-based accountability systems and not this notion that kids take tests that are administered, scored, and interpreted according to common protocol. And again, it may be semantics, but I am worried that there could be that confusion.
I recognize that I was using both colloquial definition and the classical psychometric definition somewhat interchangeably, and I was really referring to the colloquial.
And that's exactly what I'm referring to, yes. So I just, again, I think we want your audience to know that you're referring to these NCLB tests and not the whole notion of using a standardized test with our students.
That may be a solution to it.
Okay, great. My other thing, and we'll probably be debating this for years to come, but and I apologize if this is a semantic argument, but I'm still concerned that in your paper you describe our processes for setting cut points as being arbitrary. I am very comfortable with the idea of suggesting that they have elements of subjectivity in them, but I actually checked my Merriam-Webster this morning, and arbitrary means that it's done by whim or randomly, whereas subjective means that it's based on the personal experience of the person. And I am concerned that in the Smarter Balance Assessment, for example, the process for setting standards brings together in various phases. First, several thousand people who will take the test, and then they're given a list of sample questions from the test, and they'll say, based on their knowledge as a teacher, where they think the proficient student goes. And then that goes to a group of 600 people who will actually meet live, and they'll take that information from the thousands and kind of boil it down a little bit more. And yes, each one of those individuals is looking at this from a subjective standpoint, from their own experience. But by combining these things, literally thousands of people and their impressions, it gives us a notion of objectivity that wasn't there before. So, again, I can live with that, and I understand why you chose to use that word. My sense is that the way the federal law directs states to use the test scores is arbitrary, but the actual process of setting the standards on the test is actually it's a researched process that is based on expert opinions that does have an element of subjectivity in it. But again, I understand what your message is, and I'm just looking for maybe a little clarity on that and a little recognition that we just spent several $1 million of our federal tax dollars on setting standards for this test, and I would hate to think that we did it to produce a product that's going to be arbitrary in nature.
Yeah, I can fix that, and in number 6, I can substitute subjective for arbitrary and then deal with the issue of these arbitrary accountability system.
And I think that really gets to the purpose. What the problem is that we make these arbitrary decisions about kids in schools using those test results. And I think I mentioned this in my letter, that there are times where there really we don't have any research that says exactly what a third grader ought to be able to do. We rely on teachers to say, here's what my proficient kids can do. And again, that's sort of built into this process.
Yeah.
But maybe I should shut up. You were working with me before.
Other comments from board members? Sean Marie?
I was hoping Rebecca would answer Mark's first question.
Well, actually, I had her down for several of those questions.
All right, well, that's true, but it was the first one that I thought Rebecca was going to answer. And then
Dealing with paragraph 2,
No, that's good.
second paragraph of page 1.
So first of all, I want to thank you for trying to take all the feedback I know you got from many, many people, and I'm probably going to annoy you by seconding what Michael said, because I do think it'd be great to make a couple more adjustments, and I support what Michael said. And the other thing, as I look at it again, I'm worried about is helping people understand the difference between validity and reliability, because I think that's something else that comes out is related to what Michael was saying. Yes. I don't think there is such a thing as a valid test. There are valid and invalid inferences based on test scores. And that is where we're really getting in trouble in the state, or with the federal policy, where we look at the test scores and we make assumptions about what they tell us that may or may not be supported by the evidence. And we ask our tests to do too much, particularly under high-stakes conditions. In terms of reliability, there is no validity if there is no reliability. That's why we aren't using currently performance assessment as a statewide tool, because it's been difficult to achieve levels of reliability. The agency is currently working to develop reliable performance assessments, hopefully with the help of Michael, but also with the help of the Great Schools Partnership, that will measure some student performance on the transferable skills as outlined in the education quality standards. We expect that to be a process that takes some time to develop, in part because of the challenges around calibration. It's still a worthy goal, but people need to understand the difference between reliable and valid.
Let me jump in on that one, because
okay.
that's a very important point, is that some of the measures that are most valid in one sense are performance measures. I'm being careful here in the words, will not be statistically reliable for comparison purposes, even though they are a very valid measure of what they are doing. It doesn't mean that you can aggregate them across schools as part of performance criteria. I don't know how we get that, but one of the things that scares me is that we try to quantify things that are not necessarily quantifiable, and we distort the measurement when we try to do it. And when we get into performance assessments and qualitative judgments, which are very essential for what we're doing, I don't know that we will be having reliable measures in the classical sense, and that they would be valid to compare schools with them.
And I would argue that maybe the real issue is that there is a level at which there is no replacement for the expert judgment of teachers, and that it's not so much about the task. I would argue that performance tasks may also support both invalid and valid inferences. A concrete example, let's say you're doing a science performance task where kids are tasked with developing, maybe in pairs, building a boat to look at displacement in water, and then answering a series of questions. It's standardized because they all receive the same task, but it's a performance task, and if the child has very good small motor control, they may develop a really nice boat and get very different results than someone like me who built a boat and wasn't very good at it and it sank. So there's what we would call in testing construct irrelevant variance. In other words, there's noise in the measurement that has nothing to do with whether you understand mass, but has an awful lot to do with whether you have small motor control, which has nothing to do with what we're trying to test. The only person who really is in a position to evaluate in that situation is the teacher. And you cannot pull teachers out of evaluation because they're the only ones who really have the broad picture. One of the challenges in the performance task is if you think about the Vermont portfolios, when they went home in some districts, teachers realized that if you really want to support high quality writing, a lot of it needs to be done in school. And then if it's done in school, you really understand what the child is able to do independently, and that really informs your scoring, your judgment. On the other hand, if another school district is sending all the writing performance tasks home, where some people's parents are helping out and other people's parents aren't helping out, we don't really know what they're measuring, whether they're measuring the capacity of the school or the fact that some children have highly educated parents and others don't. So that's the kind of noise that gets put in with performance tasks that are administered in a non-standard way. So there is a reason for standardized testing, there is a reason for performance tests, and there is a reason for the kinds of bubble tests that we think of with No Child Left Behind. And the real question is how we use them and what are the judgments we make about student learning based on them. And there is no way to take expert educator judgment out of that equation, in my personal opinion. And the analogy I'd give, someone always told me you should be able to explain things in simple analogies. You know, if a child goes to get a checkup with a doctor, we look at their body mass index and we look at their growth chart, and you know, some kids are at the 75th percentile, some are at the 25th percentile, and some are at the 50th percentile in growth. There'll always be a distribution. And whether or not they're at one of those places might or might not be a concern based on a whole bunch of factors. If someone's an English language learner and they just arrived in this country and their parent has no formal education, if they scored at the 30th percentile, we might actually be saying, hey, good for you. It's not your language, you have no education, look how you did. The question is what we do with that information. And that's, so, it's not the test's fault if it tells us that the child isn't performing well. The real issue is what we're doing with it and whether the measures that we're getting are telling us something about how to get better. So I just want to really make sure we understand the differences and we understand that the challenge in smart use of assessment is really what sense we're making as policymakers and how we interpret the scores that we see, and whether the tools, and you mentioned the need for qualitative data. One of the things that's so powerful about some of the performance assessments, especially the ones developed in schools, is that they give teachers a very, very different kind of data that they can use to really think about the work that they're doing with their students and make better instructional choices. If students do better on those performance tests that are teacher-designed assessments or whatever it is, the probability is they will also do better on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. That's just a reality. Kids who score well in one tend to also score well in the other, except for the outliers, and there'll always be outliers. But the teacher will be able to understand those discrepant scores when they happen. So that was my little dissertation. Would you like me to go some of the questions? Oh, Michael wants to.
If I may, I'd just like to add a quick footnote to that, and gives me another opportunity to praise the paper. That I think I said in my letter that the one thing I liked was that you started out with the notion that different assessments have different purposes, and that we need to state those clearly up front. And I think that what Rebecca's describing here is exactly that case in point, that performance assessments have no parallel when it comes to providing measurements that teachers can use to make decisions about their students in the classroom. And if we clearly state that that's their purpose, then the process we go through to validate those tests focuses on whether or not the test actually meets that purpose. And so we may, for example, look at whether or not teachers are using the performance assessments to make good decisions about kids that lead to increased performance for them. On the other hand, that our standardized tests, I'll use your term on this, have a different purpose, and so our validation process would look at that purpose. That is, do those tests actually help us identify schools that need assistance and lead us to coming up with strategies to help those schools? But what makes a performance task or performance assessment a standardized test is that as part of reaching that purpose of supporting learning for kids, we try to develop scoring rubrics and select anchor papers of samples of kids' work that guides the teacher to actually understanding the kid's performance on that measure in reference to some basic standard, like the Common Core or other standards that we've developed. But they are still standardized tests, and I just want to reinforce this idea that stating up front what the purpose is and then gathering information to show if the test meets the purpose or not is what's critical here. And your paper says that.
And to be clear, standardized refers both to the actual test prompt itself, but also to the conditions under which it's administered, and that's an important distinction.
Yeah, we don't want to, performance tasks, which are highly useful, can become useless if teacher A decides that Michael's work is of high quality and teacher B looks at the same piece of work and says, nah, it's not very good, that we need to develop those scoring protocols and provide exemplars of other kids' work so that we can score them accurately across kids and across teachers and classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
This will be on the agenda in August for action, so if we could just get points of clarity, and there'll be plenty of time for more discussion at a subsequent meeting.
Okay, so should I try to go quickly through some of the questions that were raised? And Michael, you should feel free to jump in and correct me when I go off the wheels. So in terms of the second paragraph, how do we enforce this? We don't. Any more than with standardized tests, you're really enforcing it. And I think the challenge of compliance, and as you see even with some of the governance responses that you've gotten at the board, you can require anyone to do anything. Whether or not they've fulfilled the intent, you can't. You can't do that through compliance. And so I think a challenge, and I'll come back to this in the state and the retreat that we have, is to really ask ourselves if we want schools to embrace the principles outlined in that second paragraph. It has to go beyond saying to every school, you have to do these things. And I think Superintendent Worth, she said, how did she say it? I forget her exact words, but her point was that they have all these wonderful initiatives that they really want to embrace and they support, and they know they're powerful, but they are beyond the capacity to respond to each of them individually. And that's a little bit the challenge that many of our districts are going to have with respect to education quality. So we can ask them to demonstrate some of the architecture of compliance with all these guidelines, whether or not that means that they've had the time and the resources to engage in a deep and substantive way with every one of them. Well, I'm fairly confident they haven't. So that's something I'll just put out there, and it's something that, you know, I need to be mindful of, but the board also needs to be mindful of. If we want to shift the paradigm away from just compliance to responsibility and to helping empower and enabling districts to meet these ambitious goals, what are the ways that we can do that and support that? In terms of the third paragraph, in terms of what are the measures, I think that's something we're continuing to develop, and I think that the Smarter Balanced is one tool. It's one, to borrow one of the earlier presenters' phrases, one dipstick we can use to get a quick read on a sort of a status report of where districts are that gives us some information. There's a number of other measures currently under development in the state. I'll also talk a little bit later about some of the work around performance assessments, particularly related to transferable skills that we're doing. Actually, maybe I'll just throw it in right now. Vermont is the recipient with 4 other New England states of a grant through the NESSC to do some work around development of performance assessments of proficiency with relation to the transferable skills. And we expect to be developing those. Something that will be absolutely critical is professional development for teachers around development and scoring and use of these tools. So that's something we're going to hope that the board will continue to advocate for, is support for professional development for teachers. The NEA is also the recipient of a large grant with some other states to develop something that's called student learning objectives, and providing professional development support for teachers in the state of Vermont around clearly articulating goals and then developing some guidelines and understanding of how you assess progress towards those goals. So that's another example of a kind of measure that's currently under development in the state to support gains and growth along those measures. And the other thing is, in every single district, there are, I mean, from what I've seen, I'm sure there's one that isn't because there's always the black swan, but what we do see is schools developing comprehensive formative assessment strategies internally in the district to track early growth, whether it's in early literacy, whether it's one of the new math models for tracking conceptual development in sort of through benchmarks early on, so that we can have better data. Not all of it will be standardized, some of it will be standardized, but better local measures for tracking performance K through 12. One of the things that concerns me is I was at a VSA meeting and I asked how many districts have a clearly articulated K through 12 curriculum. I think maybe one person in the entire meeting raised their hand, which is really quite stunning, actually. And I know that there was a meeting recently through the Professional Learning Network that we support around implementation and development of curriculum for the Common Core. Same thing there. No one has a K-12 continuum. So one of the things that we have to do is say, if we really do want to assess student learning along, from K through 12 along these critical dimensions outlined in the education quality standards, we have a tremendous amount of work around implementation to do to make sure that there actually is a curriculum being taught so that we can develop fair and appropriate targets for kids along that continuum. And we're pretty far from being there as a state. So that's just food for thought to put out there. It isn't to say that these aren't worthy goals, but that we have some serious homework to do to get to a place where this is a meaningful goal for the state. And it's complicated by the fact that if you read the research literature, small schools can't be monitored. Their numbers are so small that you really cannot use effectively some of these data to evaluate performance effectively. And so one of the things we're also talking about at the agency is whether we can provide systematic support at the supervisory level so that we can look at growth at a supervisory level, which makes even more sense now since some of those curriculum functions have been moved up to that level, and so have the IT functions been moved up to that level. So we're experimenting and trying to figure out different ways to provide better systems feedback so that when you're sitting in your school board meeting, you can look and say, gee, this is what I'm seeing, here's some patterns, how do we make sense of those? So that's,
Excuse me,
yeah.
Rebecca, I want to apologize to Chairman Morris. I have a 1 p.m. flight,
Okay.
so I am going to leave. And again, thank you, Bill, for your work, and thanks to the board for taking on this task. I think it's something that we really need.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry to talk so much.
Please invite me back if I can be further help.
Thank you.
I'll miss your plane.
No, don't. Yeah. So on the second page, just to do another one that just jumped out at me, with the proper role of standardized testing, going back to the definition of standardized testing that Michael gave, if you think about a standard prompt and standard conditions, it is worth noting that with respect to the comment that this includes research and verification as to whether a student's performance on tests is actually predictive of performance on other indicators. This, I assume when you say large scale, you're talking about statewide, but it would be worth noting that some of the common assessments that are used in some of our large districts would technically fall into this category as well. Teachers all the time set subjective standards for students about what adequate performance is in their courses, and that's how they decide who passes, who fails, who gets an A, who gets a B. And certainly when you talk about common assessments across the district, they may not trigger consequential actions. They may if it puts someone into a tracking system. I know in our district we have common assessments that decide what math course you take starting as early as 7th grade. But be aware that there is new research coming out now on predictive performance, and it probably makes sense to continue to revisit this issue as that research comes out, and I'd be happy to provide it to the board. Moving on, I'm going to try to be brief here. I wanted to call out, because if you do this and you make this resolution, when you go nationally, when you're at conferences, when you're representing Vermont in other areas, you will be called on and challenged to articulate and defend different aspects of these. So I would really use these conversations as an opportunity to make sure you really understand the underlying logic. And I just would call out the second and fourth bullets under the resolution. The rightly or wrongly, and I don't want to debate the merits of No Child Left Behind, because I think at this point it's abundantly clear it isn't serving Vermont's interest and it isn't helping us get the improvements that we aspire for our children. But the logic behind it was an equity one, whether or not you agree with how they went about doing it. And part of what No Child Left Behind did was it called out performance of different subgroups. And in many areas of the country, it did highlight the fact that there are certain groups who have continuously and consistently been underserved, particularly children who are living in poverty and children from historical minority populations. And the whole law was actually designed really to articulate and support improvements in performance for those particular groups. So I think you should be aware that while in the Vermont context, we are really struggling to find some of these tools as useful tools in helping us achieve our goals of closing opportunity gaps and achievement gaps and serving the goals of equity. In some places, these tools did highlight inequities, and the strongest advocates of these tools tend to be members of the civil rights community who really feel that without these tools we would not have addressed nationally, particularly the systematically lower performance of African American students and students in poverty and students of color. So I think it's worth being mindful of that dynamic, because we want to be sure that our words aren't used to support an agenda that really is about not addressing the systematic poor service of education to students from those backgrounds. And just think about that, because the work that leaves us does go out and it is often used to support other agendas. And I'm beginning to have that experience myself. And similarly, I would say in the next one, it's widely recognized that standardized testing is an inadequate and often unreliable measure. I think one of the challenges is that standardized tests can be very reliable, but not support valid inferences. And again, that's where I'd make that distinction. And so the question isn't whether the tests are inadequate, but whether they're inadequate to the purposes that we're trying to put them. And I think that's just such an important distinction to keep making. On the last page, resolve that the Vermont State Board of Education requests that the Secretary of Education re-examine. I'm going to bring you back to the challenge that Mark put to us at the beginning, which is at some point, and I hope over the next year when we think about strategic planning, we can really grapple with this tension between compliance and growth and improvement, because tests can be used to support accountability and measuring and stakes and consequences. They can also be used to inform processes of continuous growth and improvement, in which case we have to consistently in all of our activities move ourselves out of compliance. So think about what that would look like, and how do we put together a portfolio of tools that will support good judgment, but not just become another compliance task for teachers that maybe they can't adequately support. And just to continue as we go forward, we talk about strategic planning related to this. I really do want to put out a plea that we, as a board and as an agency, consistently advocate for sufficient high-quality professional development for teachers in how you use some of these tools as they're developed and how you use them really to inform improvements in practices. Our teachers are working very hard, and what we are asking them to do involves a set of psychometric skills around use of assessment that most of us didn't get trained in when we entered the profession. Our teachers have to be very skilled to do the kinds of work we're asking of them, and it's not fair to ask them to do that without giving them adequate support. That would be my last comment.
Okay, are there other comments? So I think the way we're leaving this bill is that you will do some more drafting.
All right.
And what I heard earlier is that people are pretty comfortable with this.
It's a huge
So
step
even
forward.
with your redraft, it ought to be circulated in the Vermont educational community, and we'll put it on the docket, on the agenda for next meeting and take a formal vote on it.
Okay.
And thank you again. It's a tremendous amount of work.
And I would recommend that we put it out through the Vermont School Board Association as well.
Well, that's the type of thing I meant, to circulate it within the educational community. Okay, moving on. Are there board announcements?
To circulate it before next month or after next month?
No, I think you can circulate it in advance, and you can alert people
I can
that it
do
will be
both.
formally on the agenda in the August meeting.
Okay.
Updates from board members. Yes, Krista.
Well, I have a couple. First, most of you know I'm staying in the dorms at UVM this week. I'm participating in the Governor's Institute on Asian Cultures. And so students are there, and they're from 17 different high schools, all learning about Asia, and they're coming in, and it's just the Governor's Institute, there's 4 going on right now, one for engineering, math, science, and then the Asian cultures, and there's others around the state. But it's really where students, especially even from small schools, get together and can meet with like-minded peers and of an interest and get together and learn about a subject area. This was a program where students could get college credit, but there was a change in legislation that rising freshmen couldn't receive college credit. So it was a credit course. Now only if you're a rising sophomore can you get credit, but they're still having the same requirements of going through. But it's, and that might, when we think about policy, I guess that was added this session. I'm not sure which bill it was attached to, but that rising freshmen no longer can get college credit. But it is a great opportunity for students around the state, if they maybe have a smaller school, to get some specific content that they normally wouldn't get. And I just want to make you aware of that. Also, Rebecca, I went to a New England Secondary School Consortium meeting. Rebecca was there. You kind of announced that there is going to be, so a grant coming through. I didn't know if I could announce that or not, but okay, that's, I was like, I'll let you do that. And then I just want to talk about, I am on the receiving end of the EQS when I'm in the school system, and just wanted to sort of give you an update on that. So the last 3 days of school are in service for teachers. So one day was Common Core, and you had to have a Common Core ready unit and discuss Common Core. After that, we're done with the Common Core. Day 2, we moved on to proficiency-based graduation, and it was a little disjointed because it seems like it's a little too early, but we worked on making graduation requirements at our school. And it was a little disjointed. It was a little frustrating for me because we weren't even looking at standards. It was just the word proficiency-based, and so we go and we were making proficiency-based graduation just based on conversation, and it just seemed like a very weird track. People didn't know where we were going. I showed my department the EQS, and they're like, well, it's right here, why are we, so it was a lot of confusion, and I think that's common around what's happening in the field, so I spent a very frustrating day doing that. And then the last day of in service was looking at assessment, and again, what we're talking about right now, and how to make assessments based on proficiencies, and then having those hold dates. So it's just interesting being on the receiving end of the EQS at the local level, and it's there's a lot of talking to colleagues that just experienced the last 3 days of school and other schools, a lot of confusion, and I think, Rebecca, you did a great job talking that we're asking so much of teachers. Common Core, we're ready, one day, we're done, we can keep moving on. It's like one initiative and go to the next. When you only have 5 in-service days, how many initiatives can you handle in a year? And if you're only getting, I think someone else talked about this Do you want time or resources? And if you don't have time, you're not going to get the results that you want. So just to be conscious of that. And it is frustrating as a teacher on the receiving end of that, like just not having the supports that you need and not having the professional development. And it's something to really think about the calendar that we have and what we ask of our teachers. Just, that's it.
Stacy?
I'd love to hear some suggestions later, Krista, about what you think we could do to maybe address some of those. I'm sure you have some. Maybe at lunch, you'll tell us. I've had the honor of being appointed to the Building Bright Futures State Advisory Council, and if you don't know what that is, and I didn't totally even know what it was, even being in the world of early childhood, I was like, I've heard of Building Bright Futures. They have kind of two jobs. They're a 501c3 that oversees 14 regional councils across the state. They also serve a purpose of aligning state policy with local action, which actually, Krista, in a way, goes to some of what you're saying. Like, so how do all these great ideas, what's actually happening on the ground, and what do these communities need? The reason I thought this was relevant for the board is that while early childhood is traditionally out of our purview, our K-12, that as we're expanding pre-K opportunities, and some of these pre-K programs will be housed in our K-12 schools, but also as we understand with more and more brain research and development, how important that birth to 3 is, or 0 to 5, in terms of kids being kindergarten ready and what we're asking. I think it's important that the state board at least is aware of what's going on in the early childhood world, so hopefully I'll be able to help share with that communication. I also think we should look at our agenda for the upcoming year and think about inviting somebody from that community. There's a public awareness campaign called Let's Grow Kids. They are looking to get as many people as aware of what they're talking about in 0 to 3 as possible. Inviting someone like them to come and present to us, I think, would be worth our time. So.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, back in May, I attended a VSA, VSBA professional training, and like to, commend both Francis and Steve for putting that together, and other staff. Our SU went with 4 board members. Still under half of our board chairs were able to make it, but it was a great time to be together and to have this conversation. It was a pretty good turnout. Overall, I think it was considered. Still a long way to go for for board training, but a great start, and hope we do more of it, and I think we will be.
Lachlan.
Yeah, so in May, I had the day after May 21st was the day after our board meeting. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I delivered the keynote address at the Antioch College Climate Change Preparedness Conference, and the keynote address I gave was on the 3rd day, which was an educator summit. So it focused on how we use next generation science standards and Common Core to fuel, raise an awareness around climate change preparedness and get students involved in project-based learning, fighting against climate change. And so that was very cool. I was fortunate enough to have Governor Shumlin introduce me at the event. So that was a good experience. And then the next 2 days, I was at the VSA / Council of Special Educators conference in Lake Maury. Rebecca was there, she did a great job, and then I spoke on Friday morning at that conference. And I've also been appointed to the Governor's Council on Pathways from Poverty. So that was just last week. And then I've also become a campaign ambassador for Let's Grow Kids.
Oh.
So that's more about that.
Campaign ambassador what?
For Let's Grow Kids, which is a new policy advocacy group looking to expand access to early childhood education in pre-K beyond the 10 hours a week that was the legislature.
Oh, and just one last thing, I should mention that hot off the press of the Vermont School Board Association is their newsletter, and Lachlan has been out there, being these, premier speakers, and he's actually quoted in here, so from the president of Vermont School Board Association.
He's not even 18.
And so I leave this on the desk for anybody that wants to see it.
Okay. Other announcements from board members. Bill?
A couple of quick things. I went to Penn State for a national convention or convocation on the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And this was populated by a great number of prominent scholars on racial and economic inequality issues. And one of the things that they brought out was that with the accountability system that we've got, what's happening is we shine the spotlight on the poor achieving children, and these are the schools that are then classified as failing, and that this is discriminatory, and that all of the punitive consequences are falling upon the most needy schools, and the resources available to them are not adequate for what they need. And when we talk about finance reform, which we will in this retreat some, and whether we should be giving extra weights for children in poverty and the achievement gap, we need to start looking at this very, very seriously. And do we have a system that discriminates against certain children? Vermont is about 14th in the achievement gap, as best you can judge these things with the small ends. But we've talked a great deal about it. What we haven't done is something about it. And we can talk more about that as the afternoon wears on. NASB conference call, unfortunately, is a continuation of the tale we've heard before, is don't expect any money from the feds. That's not going to happen. They've had such great successes with teacher evaluation with test scores, which has been an abysmal failure, by the way, that they want to push into principal evaluation by standardized test score and then tie this back to the preparation institution of the teacher. And if your kids as a teacher score low because of poverty, then we're going to disallow your preparation program. I mean, statistically it's insane, but it's really a loss of reality in terms of where the national agenda is going. And I think that I'd really like to be doing some pushback with NASB and also with the chiefs and with other organizations, because this is really a dysfunctional kind of way to do things.
Okay, we'll move on to a very brief chairman's report. And this is, I just want to make you aware of this because it may come up at some point. The Vermont Council on Rural Development is holding a conference tomorrow, and I was invited. There was no title after my name, but it was an educational issue. I assumed I was invited in my position of being on the state board. The title of the conference is the Vermont Council on the Renewal of Public Education. And basically what they're considering is, should they take a couple of years, hold major conferences around the state and talk about redesigning our education system. I declined to attend the conference, suggesting to him that we had great new leadership in the agency. There were several established organizations, the Vermont School Boards Association, the Vermont Superintendents Association, as well as this organization that was open and doing quite well in the area of public education, and there was no need for another nonprofit to do a conference. So there may be some backlash, but I very politely and diplomatically declined the invitation.
And we know you're very diplomatic.
Well.
And polite.
Will they be doing the consolidation kind of?
I think that's, yes. If you remember, this organization at the end of the legislative session got involved in the consolidation issue, and particularly on the Senate side. So I'm sure that that's what motivated but they're holding a discussion, not only with board members, but a number of other members from the public to see if they want to proceed with this tomorrow. So,
Okay.
I just wanted to make you aware of it, because who knows where something like this goes. Moving on to the Secretary's report.
I'm going to start by actually referring back to Bill, because one of the things we are doing is continuing the discussion at the national level. And I think we're a non-waiver state. I don't need to say that again. But our ranks are continuing to grow, and we are continuing to try to partner with other states, including California, as I said, which is also actively pursuing a model that looks very similar, actually, to what we're trying to do as well. And we're the flea in the tail of the dog, but they're the dog. So we're expecting that their scale will help give some voice and credibility to some of these concerns nationwide. what I'm going to do is I have a couple issues that I just want to update you so that moving forward, you have a chance to read these, because I know that you're often asked to make big decisions that are consequential with very little time. So what I'm doing is giving you something so that you have time to process it. This will also go on the website and come back to you at the August meeting. But I know that you want lead time. So this is some information around interstate reciprocity for post-secondary programs, just to give you a really quick overview. One of the things that you know is that you review and approve in-state schools that offer post-secondary credits and degrees. But what we're seeing nationwide is that online delivery of post-secondary education, including schools whose operation is entirely via the internet, is growing tremendously. It is also increasingly challenging for regulators to keep up with the growth of distance learning and assure quality control. And in fact, we often cannot even identify which institutions are enrolling their students in online coursework because it's exploding so much. So the logic behind what's going to come before you is a practical, manageable framework for interstate reciprocity. This is supported by the institutions in the state of Vermont. We've been reaching out to them. And it really is coming up with a model or a template for how we handle both approval and reciprocity of approval. And it is a voluntary approach. So institutions which don't want to enroll in this and don't want to involve distance education students don't have to join this reciprocity agreement. But when institutions do want to participate, it gives us some standard criteria which are recognizable nationwide. And since the students in our schools may be taking courses coming out of universities in California or Delaware or New York, we don't know where, it does begin to make sense to think about some kind of consistent guidelines. So that's one issue. The other thing, and this goes back to Stacy as well, is that we have begun rulemaking for ourselves and for AHS in terms of, and working with them to draft rules for Acts 270, the universal pre-K, also number 186, depending how you want to call it. But what we hope to do is develop a draft of the rules, get some input from critical partners up front before we bring them to you, because there is a lot of intense cross-sector interest and collaboration implied, and to bring them to you in August to review and begin working on. And I wanted to just ask you again to make sure that we reserve some time on the agenda to deal with rulemaking for early universal education. And please be, it's no one's preference, but we do have a very short timeline for rulemaking because the initial legislation was introduced 2 years ago, approved this year, and the timeline in the bill was not changed. So we are actually working on a very abbreviated schedule. So we will try to get information out to you as fast as possible so that you can have ample time prior to the meeting to begin to look at those rules. We're going to get it out to stakeholders early so that they can look at the rules, so that hopefully everyone can come with some information and some thought to make that process go as smoothly as possible. I wanted to give you a couple good news updates. Our child nutrition work has been receiving national recognition, which is very exciting. In fact, Lori Colgan was invited to present at the annual nutrition conference in Boston in July. And this is a conference of food service directors, state agency staff, USDA staff from across the country. And she's being asked to talk about our school cuisine cookbook and how the USDA foods that schools get can be used in our recipes. But we've been recognized both for being an extremely lean operation. We have fewer staff per student served than anyone else in the country at this point, but also the high quality and emphasis on healthy food that's in our work. So that's a really nice piece of recognition. The transferable skills that are outlined in the EQS. So this is a really nice opportunity to get additional support. It primarily involves coaching 2 days per week for schools that are involved in this work to develop those tools and get professional development. So that's a nice benefit for the schools that are participating. One other piece to be aware of is the grant participation also has a requirement for pushing to one-to-one initiatives. We really do see embracing one-to-one as a challenge increasingly, even the way the U.S. Department of Education, the way the field, the way in general we're talking about computers is they are the new books. And increasingly we need to start thinking of the role of technology in terms of transforming education and grapple with that so that we can provide adequate support to schools, to parents who are trying to figure out how to interact with a child who now has a tablet, and to curriculum developers so they really can think about how technology supports and furthers the goals of education as opposed to how technology just becomes an alternative worksheet. There's tremendous work there. being done already and tremendous work that we need to scale up and move across the state. And we hope to take advantage of the League of Innovative Schools work to really provide some guidance for the rest of the state as well.
Right now, is that just high school, though?
It is high school, and we are going to be doing it to elementary. We're just picking the moving river and trying to get some experimentation so we can go forward. In terms of service of students with disabilities, the U.S. Department of Education just today announced a big shift in the way it's overseeing our effectiveness with respect to special education programs. Historically, it's focused on procedural requirements, things like timelines for evaluation, process hearings, transitioning kids into services. Under the new framework, they're really taking what they call a results-driven accountability approach. In other words, they're going to begin to incorporate outcomes, analysis of outcomes of students with disabilities into their evaluation of our work around special ed. And I know this links to our conversation about assessment, so at some point we'll have to have that conversation as well.
It's going to be very difficult.
It's going to be very difficult, but Bill, you'll be pleased to know that last year 41 states and territories met their requirements, and this year only 18 did, and we were one of them. So by their standards, we're doing pretty well. We actually think we have room to improve, and we are going to continue to improve despite what USDOE says. So we look forward to continuing that work. In terms of our goals moving forward, and just to articulate some of the internal discussions that we've begun to have, we would like to get back to the quiet year focused on implementation that I was promised when I first signed on this job. I won't file a false advertising suit, but I think Alice Worth spoke so eloquently to some of the challenges that we face, both in terms of making sure that we don't overwhelm our educators in our schools with changes that then they don't have the time to thoughtfully implement. And then the second challenge, which is that as long as we're talking about us and them and mine and yours, we really are not able to engage in a meaningful way with this idea of equity and how we support opportunities for all children. And to really think about the next year as an opportunity to really grapple with those two goals. First of all, by really grappling with full implementation of Act 77, as it relates to supporting college and career readiness and closing opportunity gaps related to post-secondary attainment. I think you can make a very good argument that not every kid should go to a four-year liberal arts college. What we do know is that students who leave school with a certification or a solid skill are better positioned both to be well compensated in the workforce and also to pursue additional post-secondary opportunities. And if we really believe that every child in the state of Vermont should have enough skill to be able to get or create a high-quality job that pays them enough to live in our communities, we really have to address that goal moving forward. We know that many of our students, just jumped my computer, are able but lack the resources to go to college. We are seeing, particularly in our career and technical education centers, really, really innovative and inspiring work that lets kids graduate with accreditations or certifications that are nationally recognized, that not only get them employed in the short run, but end up paying their way for the next few years through to another degree. Classic example is the LNAs. Kids leave our schools with LNAs, licensed nursing assistants. They can use that as they pursue an RN and get that four-year degree. Many of them are also leaving with up to 2 years of college under their belt. So it really shortens the amount of time they have to pursue to get that terminal certification. Going from a family where no one has gotten post-secondary education to a family that's graduating registered nurses, that's a tremendous accomplishment, and that's something that we should be really proud of, the work. And we could go through other areas within those arenas that are achieving similar success, but I think we need to figure out what those successes are and figure out how to leverage them so that more students, not just the ones who historically have gone to college, can have that. The joke in the agency has been that two of Vermont's best exports are maple syrup and highly educated high school students, and that's something we really need to take seriously. We need to make sure that all of our students are graduating with high levels of skills, but we're also providing those opportunities to the kids who historically stay in the state, so they're here in our communities. And then the other piece I'd love to have us focus on, or one of the others, there's two, is focus on full implementation of the education quality standards moving forward, particularly with respect to closing opportunity gaps in regards to those standards. And that's, I'm sure we'll go through that this afternoon, but to really take seriously the challenge of realizing that in the field, and it has to go beyond compliance. We're not going to have the perfect set of tests that tells us that everyone's gotten there. Teachers need opportunities for professional development. They need opportunities to participate in the creation of some of these tools, and we need to think as a system how to make this coherent for schools and for teachers and families. And that's good work I really hope we can embrace as we move forward. And in that vein, to just go back to something I said earlier, I was reading an article about Pasi Sahlberg, the former Minister of Education in Finland, and he said that in Finnish schools, they don't use the word accountability to talk about schools, they use the word responsibility. And just to put that out as a challenge to us, what would it be if we were responsible for making sure that every child, no matter what town they were born in, had access to a high-quality education, and how do we help towns realize that ambition? And it may involve doing something that isn't just about compliance. How do we create a system where schools opt into being the education quality schools and embrace this challenge of research and development about transforming our schools for the next century and for a world of greater equity? And then finally, the other goal that we continue to support is the goal of fiscal sustainability. We know that we don't have education quality without financial sustainability. And I think, today I handed out a document that I was going to hand out now, but you've already seen it. We are working at the agency internally to try to figure out what are some of the indicators that we could use to help apprise different districts around the state of what some of their challenges are, so that we can inform and support rigorous conversation at the local level and school boards and better decision making, because people are working with better decisions. When we sit and we look at the economic profile of the state, the fact that we have an aging population, we're not going to see increases in the general fund. We're really worried about the financial sustainability of our schools. We know that just because of inflation-based increases, that we can expect continuous 3 to 3.5% increases in school budget every year. We don't know that some of our schools can sustain that. Mr. Bickford today talked about there's 2 ways you can handle change. One, you can, he said you can do less, or you can do it more slowly. I would argue that there's a third way, which is that you can change how you do things. And think about disruptive solutions to some of these problems. When you think about the history of change, often we add an innovation that really changes how we do the work, and it makes us possible to achieve higher levels of performance at lower cost. And that's really what we're going to have to start trying to do as a state. And any role that we can play, both in, and I'll ask you, I'd love to get your feedback at some point on some of these indicators, but to help people understand both the nature of the challenge that they're trying to grapple with, but also to support smart, rigorous conversations in communities about how to better respond to these challenges and share across the state strategies for doing so would be a wonderful goal for the State Board of Education. And I think I've talked enough, and you probably want lunch.
Any questions of Rebecca? All right, let's move on to, we got a couple of other agenda items left today. You note that the financials are in the board packet. These are through June 31st, fiscal year ends, May 31st, fiscal year ends June 30th. We're a bit over on the per diems and a bit under yet on the expenses. So I would guess that we'll finish the fiscal year pretty much in line. We need to formally approve, assuming that you want to continue to be a member of NASB. That needs to be approved for the next fiscal year. The total is $19,942. Not hearing a motion means that we're not.
Bill's going to make the motion.
What?
Bill's going to make the motion.
Well, I'll make a motion, but I'll have some discussion about my motion.
Bill has moved that we move to renew our membership in NASB. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And it's been seconded. Now I gather there's going to be some conversation.
Because I thought, didn't we talk last year about maybe not renewing our membership?
Let me make this suggestion. This may be just simply where my orientation value is I found them very much accommodating to the echo chamber in terms of Washington and not speaking out on issues like teacher evaluation. In fact, they're endorsing it. They're pushing some uses of testing that I wouldn't necessarily approve of. I'm conflicted because I've been active in that organization. Sean Marie has been very active in the organization too, and I want to hear her point of view. But I'm bothered that the organization has basically become a rubber stamp or part of the echo chamber in Washington. And they rightly brag, and they should be proud of getting all of this grant money to fund the organization and thus not charging the states. But the effect is they're being bought by Gates, Walton, Broad, and other groups who are buying the staff to press their agenda using our organization to do that. And so my suggestion would be is to vote positively on the dues, but not necessarily pay it yet, but send them a letter that says that we're reevaluating where we are. And that should kick off the conversation for those of you.
Are there states that are not members of NASB?
Yes, that's correct. I think there's, what is it, Jean Marie, 35, something like that?
It's
who are-
quite a few now. I mean, I think there's more not members than members.
Less than half?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was gonna say,
I can't swear by it, but I mean, that was,
I would also have the same notion about the Council of Chief State School Officers too, but your
I
turn.
would agree. Well, we had the same conversation about whether to continue to be members with CCSSO. And we actually advised them that we were reconsidering our membership, in part because we weren't sure that they were serving the needs of the non-waiver states. And we found that when we actually had that conversation, that they were suddenly much more responsive to the needs of non-waiver states. And so I think the power of these organizations is in the breadth of their membership. So I think that's a real credible threat. If you choose to pull out because they're not serving your interests, then I think that's a credible threat because it erodes their effectiveness as a national advocacy organization. On the flip side, being members with CCSO has given us access to certain conversations and certainly furthered our collaboration with states like North Dakota and California, who really share some of our concerns.
But this question is just on NASB.
But my point is that I think if you made that concern, if you express the concern that they're not representing your interests, then I think you might find they were more responsive to your interests.
so how do you address the financial piece of being I mean, if you vote in the positive, then we're supporting $20,000 towards NASB, whereas if we wait till August and write to them to say exactly what has just been said, I don't need to repeat it. I do think the access to the material is incredibly informative, and certainly we don't have somebody either on any of the staffs in Vermont to sort of produce the national level information that we get. Whether we agree with it or not, it's the access to that information. And I find myself often not aligned with the people at the conferences, but in some ways it's useful, but I don't know if it's $20,000 useful.
And that's, I would agree. I've gone to a conference and it was useful. It was nice making those connections and being able to call those board members with different issues. But again, the price tag, and is that a good value for Vermont? I question.
Other comments?
Especially when when they give their legislative reports from DC. Well, the House Republicans want this and the Senate Dems want that. Nothing's ever going to happen. I don't think it takes a whole lot to.
So the motion that's on the table now is that we become a member of NASB in fiscal year 2015 at the expense of $19,942.
And when would we have to approve that by?
Wait a minute, Krista?
Let me talk out my meaning here a little bit, and maybe I'll modify my emotion, is that we reserve the money or we allocate it but send them a letter. And I don't know the timelines as to when it's due.
That's what I was asking, the timeline. When is it due?
Carol knows.
January, well, I think it says here, well,
January to December.
yeah.
Oh, so we got a little time.
Well, I would.
Let me ask the question. I haven't had much to do with NASB. I look at their emails once in a while. Don't find it very helpful, but what's the purpose of the letter going to do? You know, that you write to them and say we're reluctant to renew our membership? What are they supposed to do in response to that?
You want me to write it for you? I can do that.
But
You may not like what I
What is a
write.
realistic expectation from such a letter? What are they going to say?
Simply that we're reconsidering our membership. We voted this but will not be paying until we hear from you, and that we feel that the organization is too much pushing a particular agenda which may not be the interest of Vermont, and go from there. I'm not doing too well with explaining this right now, but if
Well, is it the cost? So in other words, is it but the size of the state that we're paying that amount of money? I mean, I'm not sure how I think if I remember correctly, it's the size of the state,
Yeah,
right?
it is somehow proportional.
So other people play Vermont?
Excuse me?
Yes. I think there's a question, and I don't know the answer to this. What are the benefits? I think that's really the question.
Well, Lachlan raises a good point when he says a lot of it is the Republicans say this and the Democrats say that.
They don't.
And when it comes to policy positions on early education, I think we're ahead of that curve, for example. And they have some new materials on school lunch programs that I'm not so sure that we could get from some other
So do we need
place.
to take the vote now? Can we table it, share the benefits so we can have a conversation that feels more informed?
Oh, yes. Was that a motion? Are you tabling the motion?
That's what I would do.
I
but
second
with-
her
with
motion to table the motion.
You can't debate a motion, so I'm not going to call for the second quite yet. But, so what would happen in the meantime if we were to table this motion? You'd ask Bill to write that letter?
No, I don't think. I think we should. I don't know what benefits there are, so I don't know if anybody else knows.
They
what
offer on
benefits
their
there are.
website, they do like board development and all this stuff.
I know,
We've
but
never,
it's-
we've never taken them up on it.
Well, we have.
Right, so
before
that, I
your
mean, I think
time.
Yeah, I
that
can't
becomes the next question. Do we take advantage of any of the benefits?
Well, there are a few members that attend some committee members.
Right, but I think what Lachlan is talking about in terms of the development we have in the past taken advantage of. But I think we could get the benefits either electronically or, their handouts, their brochures of what they say the benefits are, and then we can see if the people who've participated agree with what they're promoting as their benefits.
Okay, Bonnie has moved to table Bill's motion. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Seconded by Krista. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the motion has been tabled. The last,
When do we return to this, or how do we return to
well,
this?
the tabling motion was indefinite, did not give a definite time.
Yeah, I'm
August.
just
How
thinking
was the
what
motion?
we do now. Should we send a letter and say what our concerns are?
Yeah, I would do that, and we'll put it on the agenda in August. I'm just being
And
technical.
not August, it can be any time before January.
Well, let's,
Except for budget.
let's see what feedback we have in August, and we may entertain another motion to table it.
Could it also be helpful just to be looking at it in relationship to something else, seeing that's our single largest line item, to think about what resources as a board we think we don't have that we could maybe allocate? So it's not just yes or no NASB, but if we weren't doing NASB, are there other things that we really feel
Well,
like?
under the law, we cannot raise our dinner allocation above $12.85.
Aside from tofu and rice, I was thinking that there are definitely times when we have, I think, felt like either support or research, or there are other things that maybe we could use that perhaps that money could go towards. That might be a helpful way to think of it.
Okay.
Speaking of your 19,000.
And the last item is to renew the video
I'll
contract.
make a motion to renew the video contract for the next fiscal year.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mark. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no, and the ayes have it.
Do we need a dollar amount in there?
The dollar amount is $11,484. Anything else to come before the regular meeting? I think we've got something that shows us coming back into the retreat at 1:30. Is that too long? No? Okay.
Back here.
We'll come back in.
And Perry, for this evening, as long as we're here, what's the schedule for this? Where's lunch to begin with?
Going to be down the hallway to the left.
Yeah.
So if you also, once we get there, dinner is going to be in the same location as the
And dinner's being served at 6, or is there a little time period for something else? No, but when we show up at 6, is dinner being served at 6?
I would say seating will begin at 6, and dinner will be served as soon as everyone is seated and ready.
Okay, all right. No, I'm getting to it, but I'm taking care of important things, cocktail hours. Is there a motion to adjourn
Wait. Sorry. Is this, I just want to clarify that this is the last part that we're going to be on television for this June meeting.
Yes.
So this is Carol's last, this is our last opportunity to thank her on our whatever we call this, public access channel. That's not to preclude anything else that may happen in the agency, in Vermont, in Montpelier, but I really, I know everyone, go ahead, Stephen, bop me. I just wanted to thank Carol while we're live on, or whatever.
Well, and I think that's very appropriate. And I can add to what Sean Marie has very nicely said, that this board, at least in my tenure, would not have operated half as well as it has operated if it wasn't for Carol. Carol's the person that keeps us going and has done a tremendous amount for the educational system in the state of Vermont. We're going to have a lot more to say this evening, but it really is appropriate that we, thanks to Sean Marie, that we thank you for all your efforts. 40 years, did I have that right? 37?
But who's counting?
But who's counting? And you have made a major contribution to the improvement of education in Vermont. And so on behalf of the State Board of Education, thank you very much, and we will have a lot more to say this evening.
Thank you, Carol.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Lachlan.
My last motion.
And
Seconded by Carol.
let the record show that Lachlan made his last motion by adjourning, and Sean Marie second, and all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. We're adjourned.